Law enforcement trains around it's a place of the line that refers to yeah. IALEFI. It's the one that Alexandra Nelson wanted us to go to. Yeah.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Instructors Roundtable here at the IALEFI Online Virtual Conference. My name is Adam Kanakin. I'm going to be your host for this roundtable. It's an honor to have you here. Really excited about the panel that we have together for everyone today. But before we jump into it, I want to just quickly go over a few things about the conference and to let you guys in a little bit of information while I have everybody here live. First and foremost, for anybody who's here live on the roundtable, the chat box is open. Please feel free to interact with the other attendees. And if you have any questions at all for any of the panelists, please feel free to put that in the chat. If it's to one specific panelist, just put Lon Bartel, Dr. Lewsinski, whatever it is, and then ask your question, and then we can direct it to them. All right. Besides that, for anybody attending the IALEFI Online event, you will notice a few things. We had a little bit of a technical hiccup with one of the sessions today with Paulo and Jacopo. That has been resolved, and that session is up live now, so make sure to check that out. Additionally, there's going to be a few missing sessions from what we had initially laid out in the syllabus. The sessions with Joe Ferreira and Fletch Fuller, we've had a little bit of a technical issue putting those together with some of the recordings, so we're going to be releasing those. You're still going to get them. They just may not come out by tomorrow, so stay tuned. We'll send the announcements through email when those become available for you. Also, at the end of each session, every time you attend a session, if you haven't already, there is an instructor survey at the bottom of each of the sessions. That is for the instructor. Those are all going to be passed off to them, and it's just kind of a way so that they can get some feedback on the content that they put out for this course. So as instructors, please make sure to support them and help them out and give them the feedback on their courses. Following the event tomorrow, there will be a post-event survey available on the app in the survey section. Make sure to fill out that post-event survey and get all the information to the team at IALEFI so that we can adjust and fix things or continue things that you liked from this event and maybe add a few things for the next one coming down the pipe. So that's also very important. Make sure to do that. All right. One thing I do want to bring up, the team over at Virtra reached out to me and they want to give away some live passes to the Islet Summit that's coming up in 2021. So if you guys aren't familiar, I ran the International Law Enforcement Training Summit in July of 2020. We had over 75 hours of training content, and we had over 10,000 officers attend internationally. So we're spooling that up again for 2021. It's going to be even bigger and better. And we're going to be and Virtra is going to be sponsoring 3 attendees free comped full access passes to that event. So in order to be eligible for that, if you go to Virtra's company page on the event app, click through to their website. There's a landing page with a little form that you fill that out, and everybody who enters that will be entered into a draw to win, and we will announce that again coming up after the event. Roundtables. If you watched the roundtable yesterday, you got a glimpse about how these roundtables work. We have one tonight. And just to let you know that we run one of these roundtables for the Tactical Breakdown podcast every month. So the last Thursday of every month, usually we run a roundtable that is open to absolutely anyone to attend. And we pick different topics in law enforcement training. So you can check out our past roundtables. We have 11 that have already been done. And if you are watching this on YouTube, which I know you are, if you click the subscribe button to the channel and the little bell icon, it'll send you a notification every single time that we run one of these events, so you don't miss any of the roundtables moving forward. All right. Well, with that being said, I want to open this up, introduce the panel of instructors that we have, and get things rolling. Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for taking the time and joining us here on the roundtable. I'm just going to go around and introduce everybody real quickly, and then I'm going to give you each a chance to just give us the quick Coles notes of who you are and where you're coming from. So we have Dr. John Black, Dr. Bill Lewinski, Matt Little, Lon Bartel, Tom Olabrando, Alexandra Kitty Nelson, and coming to us live from Italy in the middle of the night there, Jacopo Guarino. Jacopo, thanks so much for taking the time, brother. Really appreciate you being here. Why don't we start off with you, man? Why don't you just give us a quick background about who you are and why you wanted to join this panel?
Well, first one is it's an honor. Thank you, Adam, for the introduction. I'm Jacopo Guarino. I'm the 51% of Tadpole Tactics, with Paolo being the other 51%. We have a strange mathematic here. we as a team are bigger than just one, but what we do is basically train law enforcement and military throughout the world. We develop programs mostly, and that's what we do. And we have been with IALEFI since long time, I think 10-ish year, and we have been hosting the ATC classes for at least 4 or 5 times with decent success, I can say, thanks to you attending them. So I'm here to just being surrounded by so big names to share something with you, if I may. So enjoy the conference. I might leave a little bit early because it's really late here.
Awesome. Well, Jacopo, obviously they don't have Cole's notes in Italy, and that's fine. I understand that. No worries there. We'll let you get away with it. I'm just going to go around the circle here, kind of counterclockwise. So, Alexandra, go ahead.
Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Really happy to be here tonight. I'm Alexandra Kitty Nelson, and I am on your board of directors. Thank you very much again for electing me. I'm happy to serve you all. I'm a firearms instructor for my police department, and I do civilian training on the side. I'm also the firearms program coordinator under our tactical operations group in my department. So I'm happy to be here to share, again, this great depth of knowledge with everybody. So thanks so much.
Tom?
Hey guys, I'm Tom Alibrando. I currently work for IWI, Israel Weapon Industries US. I lead the academy, which we teach civilians and law enforcement as well. Been here for about 4 years. I do law enforcement sales. I do product development. I have a big background in a lot of different weapon systems because I've done some different things. And obviously I do training for folks that need to know, civilians and law enforcement, occasionally military alike. I was a law enforcement officer in Arizona for about 11 years, 7 years on the SWAT team as sniper, entry guy, assaulter, and I taught all those things. And then I left that, ended up working for a private security company for about 10 years and worked on a variety of State Department and DoD programs, teaching military law enforcement. One of the programs was international training, anti-terrorism assistance program. So I got to travel quite a bit in all those things. And I worked overseas in a PSD counter assault role and did intelligence. I got picked up by IWI about 4 years ago. So that's kind of me in a nutshell.
Awesome. Lon?
Lon Bartel. I'm also a Arizona boy like Tom. Did little over 20 years here. I'm currently the director of training for Virtua. By way of law enforcement, I sat on the subject matter expert committee for the state of Arizona Post Commission for Defensive Tactics, as well as for firearms. I'm one of the original founding members for the state SWAT Association, which is the Arizona Tactical Officers Association. Served as the secretary for 5 years. My assignment on our team, I was our lead tactical breacher, so I still believe that there is no problem that's so insurmountable that the proper use of explosive can't handle it. Keep that in mind. And prior to even my law enforcement world, I come by the way of a sports medicine background. I was a strength coach and a personal trainer, and my actual background is in exercise and sports science. So I kind of look at things a little bit different from a training perspective. I look more at training cops as we train athletes, which I can make a pretty decent argument over a beer or few anytime that you want, or a Pinot. Keeping that in mind, right, Doc?
Awesome. Matt?
Hi, guys. Thanks for having me on. My name is Matt Little. I was kind of lucky enough to have 2 combined careers. I started out as active duty Army, and then before 9/11, I decided I wanted to be the big city police. So I stayed in 20th Special Forces Group in the National Guard, and I became a Chicago cop. I retired from there a couple years ago, wrapped up my time there as the training coordinator for our full-time SWAT team. Retired from SF a few years before that. And my last position in my SF company was running our training detachment there as well. I now have a training company of my own, Graybeard Actual, doing firearms, CQB, stuff like that, both for civilians and law enforcement. And I also work for Staccato, doing training and demonstrations for law enforcement and military units on the pistols. So retired from Chicago, now I'm down in Texas where it's warmer and freer. And like I said, I'm happy to be on the panel tonight. Thanks.
Awesome. Dr. Lewinski.
Hi. Well, I'm truly humbled and honored to be here among the practitioners. I'm someone who studies this. So it's really a pleasure to be here with people that actually practice it. I've been interviewing officers that have been involved on a cutting edge for a long period of time, over 3,000 officers, police that have made a deadly force decision, totally apart from any of the military that I have worked with. I've studied that for decades. It was 1982, 81. I started teaching in a university-based law enforcement academy process. In Minnesota, you have to have a 2 or 4 year university degree. And within that, we have supposedly an integrated clinical component, which covers the academy. And when I started teaching in that, we had content and we had process, and neither one of those was evidence-based. As I began to push more toward trying to develop a foundation for what it is that we were doing and how we were doing it, I began to do some very interesting research that led me into kind of, again, the cutting edge of decision-making and performance issues, and how and why we need to train things in a particular way, and how and why we need to then understand how things turned out the way they did. So it's got application for both training and analysis. And why I'm here, I don't know that you asked that. I know you asked that initially, Adam. And I'm here because I have long admired the work of this organization. In fact, my very first presentation of any of our research was to MALEFI, Minnesota Association of Law Enforcement Firearms Instructors. And that was somewhere in the realm of a quarter century ago. And in return, they gave me a lifetime membership, which nobody knows about but me anymore, apparently. So anyway, that's me, and I'm looking forward to sharing the stage with this really great group.
Thanks, Bill. Dr. Black.
So first of all, I guess the most critical information for Jacopo is that my mother's maiden name is Iannacone. So we'll just move from there, and that will actually that should help vet me. I did 30 plus years in the military, 15 years on the teams, 5th group the entire time. And then after that, I was civil affairs and psychological operations and information operations. So I sort of ran the gamut of it for 30 plus years when I retired. I did 23 plus years with law enforcement, obviously some of that being concurrent time. During that time, I was the lead defensive tactics instructor, firearms instructor, built defensive tactics program, use of force investigation, etc. In the meantime of that, I got my master's in counterterrorism, and I recently got my doctorate in business intelligence, specifically how sense making and visualization of information is then morphed into decision making. And that's what I really work on today, and I try to bring that back to all the stuff we're looking at. I'm an expert witness in both federal and state court. I've testified, 50 plus times. I deal with anything from business strategy all the way up to and including how people move with kinetics with what Sensei Lewinski works with. So just glad to be here.
Amazing. So as you guys have heard, the amount of knowledge in this panel itself is amazing. We have not only do we have international content coming by way of Jacopo and myself, but you have special forces, you have Army, you have law enforcement, you have tactical officers, you have sports training, you have educational training, you got weapons manufacturing, simulation training. So when we talk instructor and training development, I couldn't think of a better group than this to really just kind of bounce ideas off one another. And so real quickly too, before I forget, because I wanted to bring this up, For Science is one of the sponsors here for IALEFI. And so we are going to be auctioning off two courses. So I think we're doing 2 of the de-escalation training courses that For Science has put out, and we're going to give those away for free. So one of them we're going to give away free live here tonight for all of the attendees. And so if you're here on the live chat about a little bit down the road, I'm not going to tell you when, so that you have to stick around. We're going to do we'll do some type of live draw. Dr. Lewinski will do it, and we'll give away one of those training passes for one of those courses. All right, well, let's jump right into it, team. Instructor and training development is the topic. Obviously, this is a firearms heavy conversation. We're talking about firearms training. So I'm going to put it out there first. Is there anything that comes to top of mind for any of you when I asked you to be involved in this roundtable that you were like, I need to talk about this on this panel?
Adam, I'll jump right in because I think you started it off with talking about Force Science's de-escalation course, which is excellent, by the way. I'm also heavily into crisis intervention training with some of the stuff I do for my police department and for the state of Illinois. And I think it's important to remember that all of the training we do as law enforcement, it's not mutually exclusive. We don't just do firearms training in its own little vacuum and crisis intervention training. And then we hear all this stuff about de-escalation right now. And it's become such a nasty buzzword in the media that I think that we're losing our focus on what that actually means and how we can use it in our training, in treating our students better and making sure that we're connecting with them and also teaching them how to connect with the world better. And I know that we have experts on our panel that have done more white paper research than I have on it, so they can probably speak more to the sciencey part of those topics. But I think it's a good place to start. Go.
No, I'd like to add to that, because one of the things I'm seeing with de-escalation, consistent with that, is helping officers relax and lower their stress levels down. And we certainly need to look at that and need to look at what's currently being done, including positive visualization, verbalization, and tactical breathing and the rest of it. But one of the things we need to get much better at, and it's not just in firearms, it's the fact that firearms and communication and assessment and decision-making are all kind of linked, and they're all driven by our emotional arousal levels. And I think we need to take better control of emotional regulation. And one of our cutting-edge research components has to do with cranking up and taking down stress levels based on something other than visualization, tactical breathing, other sorts of elements. We're looking at emotional regulation based on visual cognitive processing issues. And I think that's the next frontier of this whole profession. And we need to drive that forward.
Man, this sounds like an extension of yesterday's discussion on coping strategies, doesn't it, Adam?
A little bit.
We were talking about a lot of the training last night where agencies and instructors across the country will do some type of what they refer to as stress inoculation training, and it ends up usually being just stress exposure training because they miss a key component, which is the inclusion of some type of coping strategy in that context of the training environment without bringing that coping strategy in. And Dr. Lewinski mentioned positive self-talk and tactical breathing, and those are just a few examples of some of the coping strategies. And there's other ways as well, but we do see that. So bringing in all of those components, I think, are critical, because decision-making is really the major failure that I see, and where we're seeing a lot of challenges, even in the de-escalation processes, because they don't necessarily know when I need to be tactical, when I need to be talkative, when I need to back out. Do I need to transition to another methodology or another person talking because I'm not building the rapport? It's the decision making that we see, and when we bring our arousal level to to the point where we're able to really cognitively process what's going on, and make better decisions, I think we end up with better outcomes.
So
I've got something.
I'm sorry.
Sorry. Yeah, sorry, John. I've got something on this that I'd like to kind of bring out, right? So this really, if you look at history, look at warrior classes throughout history, this is really nothing new. And I know that warrior is it's for some people kind of a trigger word for law enforcement right now because of all the things going on politically, but the mindset to prevail is the same, regardless of whether you're talking about warrior protector, all the different buzzwords we're using. So throughout history, like every warrior class throughout history, every protector class throughout history has had these sort of mechanisms in place. If you look at the Stoics in Greece, look at the Zen that the samurai used, modern sports psychology with optimal level of arousal, breathing patterns, all of these things are really the same. And they're a vital component to be effective in conflict, whether you're talking about conflict as a law enforcement officer or talking about conflict as a soldier, or historically. That's why the martial arts place such a big emphasis on these things, I think. And it's really no different than modern sports psychology when you get right down to the nuts and bolts of it.
So I just want to piggyback. I'm a systems guy. It's what I do all my doctoral research in. And I want to piggyback on basically what everybody said, but we'll start from Matt. I absolutely agree with the idea. And we, all too often, I think we try to take a binary choice. We're trained a lot of times in checklists. And that's not to say that it's wrong. They have their place, that they're very good for introducing block training and initial concepts. But at some point, you have to put the checklist away, so to speak. Not that you wouldn't use it in a critical situation or anything else. But what I'm talking about is from a training perspective, it has to then go to the next level. It has to get to these things. And we have to start incorporating those things that you guys have been talking about, emotional optimization and this type of stuff. And to Matt's point, the warrior strength came from his caring of others. Warrior caring protection, they're not in any way exclusive concepts. We have a tendency in decision making to basically break it down to the three choices, get rid of one, so we got a binary choice, and then we pick one, because that's easy. We're really good at that when it comes to decision making. And I think sometimes as instructors, we rely on this linear approach where, for example, and I think James Cotronis was talking about de-escalation that the Savage Group does. And for example, is de-escalation something at the end of a linear process? Or is it something that instead is dynamic and has a constant ebb and flow to it, as any situation has? And going all the way back to what Lon said, I would suggest or argue that precedes decision making is sense making or interpretation of your environment and knowing what to look for under expert schema and these type of things. And if we increase the ability of comfort, so the person walks into, there's an old saying in martial arts, when you step in the mat, you're in my world. This is my arena. You get to dance with me. I'll decide when the dance stops. And if we can get this level of comfort, that which comes from assessment and the ability to have this constant ebb and flow of the sense making, I think the decision making just by nature, hey, look, I got this technique I can pick, or I've got de-escalation and sometimes I have to move. I think what you're going to see is the decisions naturally change. If we focus on the decision, if we focus on the outcome, Paul Taylor does a really good job. For example, if we looked at error as an outcome, an undesired output of a system, and he cites Decker and the other folks, but the system produced it. The system of training, the system of culture of the organization, the system of that person that's having a bad day with a divorce or whatever else. So again, I realize it's a little bit ethereal, but sense making precedes decision making. Sense making then is part of the things that we have to work on for decision making when it comes to training, especially in an instructor cadre.
One of the things that Matt has commented on, though, is when an expert begins to really develop a skill, and I was listening to Matt do some stuff last night online, and he commented on how when you really develop expertise, things almost begin to slow down. We did a really interesting study on skilled drivers in London Met. We put EEG skull caps on them and by computer testing, monitored what these guys were seeing and doing and are able to report and process on over a month of actual in vivo driving, 6 to 8 hours a day, high-speed runs, high-speed pursuits. What we found was that at the end of that period, they were able to report 4 times more information in the actual environment in which they were engaged in high-speed runs up to 150 miles an hour. And it's not that things slow down for them. It's that, as Lon was pointing out, and as John was pointing out, it's they know the schema, they know the patterns, And then all they have to do is recognize something. And that kind of allowed them to, as John said, now you're in my world. Because this world at 150 miles an hour was something they became so acutely attuned to that they were able to see and process. They knew what, where, when, and how their whole field was going to unfold. And we seldom get people to that point in anything we do in the police world. And that's why we went over to England and studied this pursuit driving course, month-long course that they have, is because we could really test this high level of skill performance. And they really knew what, where, when, and how things were unfolding with a high degree of predictability and credibility. And that allowed them to get more information and to master their world better.
And that has a direct correlation to firearms training, right? So I compete in action shooting sports. I'm a masterclass competitor in the USPSA. And it's very, very different from CQB. It's not tactical, it's pure shooting, right? But you're literally judged on thousandths of a second. 20th or 30th place at nationals is probably, over the course of 3 days of shooting, 16, 18 stages, only going to be a second behind the first place winner, and just as accurate. So, I mean, it's speed and accuracy combined. And what I found after a few years of doing that is that even though it wasn't CQB, and even though I'd been doing CQB for decades at what I thought was a pretty high level, I got better at CQB because my processing speed had increased. I was learning to look at things in thousandths of a second with an eye to efficiency. And that carried over to my regular job and to the CQB, because now my bandwidth was greater in that processor in the back of your head, and I could see things faster.
I think that the minimum common denominator here is basically the human body, the physiology and the psychology of the human body. We were discussing human through ages. I don't remember who was pointing out that we are doing the same things that the ancient were doing. And we are cross-referencing a lot, if you notice, to different sports, different work, jobs, and way of life. So as a suggestion because listening to this panel is very useful for everybody that do this job, but to add a little suggestion from my point of view to the fellow instructors that are following us tonight is, as you see, we are very contaminated. So don't be afraid of looking for information and knowledge in other gardens than just the tactical environment or police working or similar context. Look forward to search information on how the human body works. Many other topics, from my experience, have been finding a lot of information very useful on the range, thanks to aviation studies on reaction and decision making, and someone before me was mentioning human factors in errors. I am an expert in diving medicine, and we have a lot of research is talking about human factors in erroring, as a friend of mine is now calling it. So there is a lot more than just police work, range work, shooting to grab information from. So keep an open mind, listen to people like the people that are here tonight is great, but don't focus just on one topic. Try to widen your experience in this, because the human body works the same if you're running, if you are driving, as Dr. Bill was saying before, if you are diving, if you are flying a plane. We are all the same concept there. We work the same way.
Yeah, he teed you up long. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think one of the things that we see as far as that increase in processing speed that keeps getting mentioned, and how things appear to slow down but we process faster, I really think it has a lot to do with cognitive load. When you go to John Sweller's work and look at how much we have available in that working memory, and if we can pass off some of that working memory into specific schema, it occupies less of that space. We have more of that space to then take in the information, make decisions, plan ahead, and those kind of things. We only have so much of that working memory truly available. And that expertise that's been talked about is how we're taking multifaceted aspects instead of individuals. We're now producing that individual schema that resides, it takes up less of that working memory, so that we can get more processing speed, to the task at hand.
We have a special guest joining us. So Alexandra messages me. She's like, "Hey, you should reference that or send the link to that Scott's video." And I was like, "I got one. Hang on a second." Scott, I know you're in the middle of teaching a class, brother. I appreciate you taking the second to join us. Comments came up about de-escalation training, and the video that you put out just a few weeks ago or so has kind of taken the training industry by storm. I think everyone agrees that it was such a fantastic just a representation of what that is. Can I ask you to just summarize that and why you put that out there?
Happy to. Can you hear me okay?
Yep, you're good to go.
Well, thanks for having me, and thanks for letting me join such an esteemed group. When Adam calls, I guess you pick up and you hop in a video. He's always calling for something, though. So thanks for having me. Yeah, that video is just an actual clip from one of our online training courses, and it's just a little bit about de-escalation. And I guess I was just getting a little bit frustrated with maybe the public and the society's view of de-escalation and sort of the impossible tasks that they're asking officers to accomplish, these sort of superhuman tasks of de-escalating others. And so I thought, well, maybe this video would be something both law enforcement officers and maybe even more importantly, folks in society, police critics might like to see or should watch. And my thoughts are this, and I don't think it's anything outside of what a lot of other folks on the panel would agree with. De-escalation is great, and de-escalation is something that all cops should be thinking about in law enforcement and is a great goal, but we need to look at it realistically. And de-escalation, being realistic about that, probably starts with defining that. In other words, what is de-escalation? What does it look like? For a lot of folks in the public and a lot of police critics, I think that they're confusing the term de-escalation with the absence of force. And for any of us that are practitioners, right, folks that are working law enforcement officers and have to go out and deal with people that are resisting our efforts, we know that that's not always possible. But if we, for instance, bite somebody with a dog, perhaps shoot them with a less lethal round, but they go on to live, and we didn't shoot them with a firearm, is that de-escalation? Probably. Is that a win? Probably. Is de-escalation always possible? In other words, do the police just choose to de-escalate or not? Is that the equation? No way. I was a crisis negotiator, a hostage negotiator. I know how to, I guess, talk to people well and convince them to do things they don't want to do. And I have a fair amount of training and experience, and I can tell you quite plainly that there's people that I don't have the ability, I don't possess the ability to talk them into doing things they don't want to do. And while I'm unfortunate, it's true that there's a segment of the population that we're going to have to use force on. No matter if we have the best trained negotiators in the world, no matter if we made every police officer a crisis negotiator, gave them 40 hours of mental health training and all that stuff, that's all good and well. But there's just a segment of folks that we're not going to be able to persuade through verbal tactics to do what we'd like them to do. Why? For a variety of reasons. Generally resulting in they have some diminished capacity to cooperate. Diminished capacity was a legal term. The guy was insane at the time of the crime, so he had the diminished capacity to be culpable for a crime. But I think it plays well into what we do. Is there's folks that we deal with that either through drugs, alcohol, mental illness, they're in some psychotic episode. I don't know that they're even hearing us when we say we'd like to de-escalate with you. There's maybe the lights are on, but nobody's home. And de-escalation, although talked about as if it's something I, as a police officer, I'm a policeman in California, they Did Scott de-escalate that guy? Or can Scott de-escalate that guy? As if it's some kind of verb, right? It's a thing I do to someone. In reality, I think it's more like a noun. It's something we offer. It's a thing we offer de-escalation. So given the right conditions, and if anyone's listening to this, I would point you over to Force Science and Bill Lewinski and Von Kleem and read those articles and take those classes and learn about, well, gee, what are the conditions that need to be there before we offer de-escalation? In other words, if I walk up on a scene and there's a guy with a knife and he's about to stab somebody, am I to there, hi, sir, could you please put down the knife? Because when you stab people, it makes me feel that, no, come on, that doesn't make any sense. There's certain conditions that need to be in place before we're set up to make the offer for de-escalation. That's things like containment, communication. Can we even talk to this guy? Are we able to talk in his language? Is he hearing us? Are we close enough where he can hear us? Do we have the technology to broadcast over there? And on the list goes of when the conditions are right, we can make an offer of de-escalation. But thinking of de-escalation as a verb, something we do to someone, equates that to a magical power. Like Scott got on scene, he had his magic wand and he went, boop, you're de-escalated. And that is a fallacy, and that is a naive way of looking at de-escalation. So when you see the crazy video that looks kind of bad when we're using force and the police are doing X, Y, and Z, instead of thinking, why didn't those police de-escalate? Ask the question, A, what is de-escalation? B, were the conditions right for them to de-escalate? C, were the conditions right so they could make the offer? D, was the guy able to understand the offer? And did he do the two things that are required of that person, which are agree to de-escalate? Okay, I will put down the axe. Actually participate, meaning I will put down the axe, because if the guy's not going to agree to participate and then in fact participate, then our offer of de-escalation is null and void. And that's kind of my theories on de-escalation and ones we try to share in all of our law enforcement training courses, both the online stuff and in person. We're in California now teaching field training officers this week, and we just shared that with them. Hey guys, in California now you are required by law to use de-escalation. What does that mean? What does that look like? How will we know when we did it? What are the conditions that need to be necessary for that? So those are some thoughts on de-escalation.
Awesome. So that was even better than the video.
Oh, well, thanks.
And I know you're in the middle of something, so whenever you have to jump off, just please go ahead and do so. Does anybody have any questions here for Scott while he's around?
I love his take on reality. It's really good. Thank you, Scott.
No, thank you.
Super quick, if I can figure out how to unmute myself here. No, thanks a lot for sharing, Scott. It was even better than the video. And it just strikes me that as trainers over the years, we get these snippets of good ideas from various places, and it's kind of like we don't fully flesh out the ideas. So we either keep our training mutually exclusive, like crisis intervention and firearms training, for example, or we only take pieces and parts of it. And I would love to see instructors in general start embracing the idea of, hey, I know what media does with de-escalation, and stop trying to bring that in or just mocking that, and bringing in the true spirit of it, which is what you're talking about, and understanding what it means so that we can integrate that in what we're training, because we're never going to recognize those cues if we keep just making fun of it and not understanding that it really is a part of what we're supposed to do as the police. It's what we do as guardians or as warrior guardians, or however, there I am using a bad word, but as the guardians that we're supposed to be. So I don't know if you have thoughts on that, about how to integrate it better into our training.
Yeah, that's true. And I bet we'd all agree if we were king and queen, that we would make police training more holistic. And as opposed to having firearms training day and defensive tactics day and first aid day, it would just be another training day. And everything would be holistically interleaved together. And I'm not going to hold my breath, for our industry to completely change and that to occur. But I think we're making small changes here and there. And to your point about people making fun of de-escalation, that is absolutely true. And cops do sort of snicker and sneer at it when they say, oh, we're going to de-escalation training. But I really don't fault them in not taking it seriously, because the law enforcement training industry, law enforcement agencies, I don't know that as a whole, they're taking it seriously. Because if we're going to send cops to, these are working police officers, we're going to send them to a training class that's called something related to de-escalation. And it basically amounts to talk nice to people. That is a naive understanding of the tense, rapidly unfolding, uncertain, ambiguous circumstances that police officers work in. And so if that's the low bar that agencies will settle for, because we can check the box and say we sent them to training, then I don't fault any officers for making fun of it, because it's laughable, right? It's laughable and unrealistic. When I go on patrol and I'm looking at some, mentally ill guy, he's on drugs and he's armed with an unconventional weapon and he's kind of approaching people, but they're not quite hostages or victims yet. And I'm looking for a shooting solution, or should we tase him? But I'm not. Telling me to talk nice to that guy is laughable. And we need to approach everything holistically, such as, is the officer in control of themselves? Are they eating right? Are they getting enough sleep? But when we just tell cops, go to this training class, and all it is talk nice to them, or all it is you should do yoga, that the cops are going to make fun of that, because it goes, I don't see the direct parallel there. I need something I can use practically tonight. I need the laws that are in place that appreciate the kind of circumstances I work under, and are not looking at police work in this Pollyanna sort of view of you should talk nice to everyone. I'm not one of these, blue sheepdog, we're the guardians and we protect people from the fear you don't, whatever. I don't subscribe to all those slogans either. I want to talk realistically. I want to talk intelligently and train people intelligently that's realistic for the realistic types of things we're going to face, right? Love to interleave and interweave all these kind of great training ideas, but I think until as a whole that the law enforcement training industry and agencies start demanding high quality training, we're going to find cops kind of goofing on this stuff, because it's kind of goofy.
All right, Scott, I know there's a few panelists here that have questions for you. So, Lon, why don't you go ahead?
Yeah, it's not so much a question for Scott. Actually, I wanted to talk about one of the things that he hit on, kind of briefly. And at the same time, I'm almost plugging Force Science. Force Science's de-escalation program, they have the Azar-Dickens scale. And I think that, Scott talked about the aspect of, I'm just going to magically do this and wave my wand and those kind of things. But that Azar-Dickens scale, I think, gives law enforcement a tool to not only make decisions, but I think it's defensible. Meaning, if this event didn't have de-escalation in a box, being able to use that scale, you can defend your actions on whether this person was even somebody that was willing to, accept that gift of de-escalation. And I keep talking it as a noun because I like the way Scott brought that in. So the way that Force Science puts that together and uses that scale to help evaluate, that's one of those critical components. Not just talking nice and let's not use pointing gestures, and let's make sure our posture's correct and we're standing with open arms. But that little nugget that's part of that course and understanding how it applies, I think it creates a lot of power that will help protect the officer and protect the agency in its implementation.
Yeah.
So I've got something for you. So here's kind of my take on this, and it's meant to be kind of complementary to what you just said. It's not in any means meant to be in opposition to it at all. But I think that one of the things we should look at when we talk about training being holistic is that the more competent an officer is, technically, tactically, psychologically, the more able they are to handle the situation where they can properly offer de-escalation. I use it as a noun, right? So the better you are at defensive tactics, the better you are at firearms, the better you are at handling a situation tactically, making sure that you have, avenues of approach, backstops, all of these things taken care of, the easier it is to then resolve the situation without resorting to higher levels of force, I think. So I think one of the big problems in the industry, especially with departments who, we've all run into it where brass doesn't give sufficient priority to true training. They give lip service to it. So the officers, through no fault of their own, don't have a sufficient competency level to really handle things like de-escalation and still be on top of the situation tactically. What do you think?
No, great point, Matt. And, it's probably not too shocking to anybody in the panel or that's listening that, if you were to go to the average law enforcement training course or kind of see like what agencies are doing, I don't know that you'd be overly impressed, and a lot of law enforcement training kind of is that death by PowerPoint, check the box. Well, hey, at least we sent those officers to that training. And the question is seldom asked, did learning occur? Did learning occur? Well, they went to the training. Yeah, they attended the training. Did learning occur? And speaking of your training, was it training or teaching? And speaking of that, was it teaching or talking? Was there a guy standing in front of a class talking at the students? Is that teaching? Not necessarily. And if he were teaching, was there learning? And I don't know that there's this real focus on that type of thing. And Matt's point of, hey, the more competent these individual officers are in physical skills and shooting skills and stress tolerance skills and crisis communication skills, probably the better set up they are to avoid whatever violent confrontations can be avoided and handle professionally those that can, right? The skilled fighter generally is much more confident in his own physical skills and doesn't feel the need to go hands-on maybe quite as early as someone who's less skilled was. The skilled shooter isn't shooting in a panicked fashion. They're calmly approaching it as, sort of just another day at the office. And that's kind of what we want for people. I think, if anything, good comes out of this last year and the sort of civil unrest and this really microscopic look at police training and the demand for better, if anything comes good, because I'm not sure there is that maybe, just maybe, our society will start taking a closer look at law enforcement training, right? Do we need some standards? Do we need some national standards that experts create? And then we hold folks accountable. And when we send those police officers off to a training class for whatever it is, how do we ensure learning occurred? How do we know learning occurred? What behavior change do we hope they walk away with at the end of the class? How will we measure it? I think that's kind of the key. And is that what's going to come out of 2020 and sort of 2021? Don't know. Like to think so.
Yeah, guys, just a few points to kind of hit on this stuff. So there was a great book that I read a long time ago called The Men, the Mission, and Me. It was written by a CAG guy, Delta guy. And the one thing that came out of that book that I remember to this day is the bad guy gets a say. No matter what we do, what we plan, he has a say in what's going to happen, right? And a long time ago, when I was taught to deal with things, especially when I had to explain it, Officer Alibrando, why did you act in a certain way? The answer was, well, because he made a decision and I had to react to it, right? We all do that OODA loop thing. And I remember going to communication school as a young officer. I got sent to communication school because there was a cop in Arizona who came from New Jersey. So clearly I had to go to communication school, and it was a punishment. One of the best schools I ever went to. Not something every officer gets that they should. And it had to do with the degree of de-escalation. But like guys are saying, it wasn't about always talking nice. And you can't do that. I agree that the warrior mindset has to be there no matter what. Even back then, as I was going through, as my career progressed on, they were trying to shy away from that word and say, you don't want to have that. I think the more of a warrior you are, the more confident you absolutely are. And you know where the limits are, and you're like, nah, I'm going to try not to do this. It's kind of a last resort thing, obviously. But in all honesty, at the end of the day, you knew it was there and you could tap into it when you need to. And it does develop that confidence. The academy, when I taught at the academy, is very, like, we all had to do it block oriented. Defensive tactics here, firearms here, and then, accident investigation. It's all kind of broken up. The only time those guys get a chance to deal with actual issues is when they do like their final week and they're going through final phase. And then they have those scenarios that we always hit them with, right? The slow burn and everything else. And the guy walks out in the red man suit, not very realistic. In all honesty, I think when you get into DT, there needs to be more scenarios where you don't necessarily, have that feedback that you need to use DT, that you need to do something else. And I think that, displaying that gets them more ready. The only thing that's going to get guys, you guys were talking, everybody was talking about how, the better you get, the longer you do the job, you get out of your zone, right? You start to see more. You're not hyper vigilant. You're just taking it in because you've had, you've been through stress so many times, you understand what you're doing. It comes from the experience. There's no way to replace that. It's impossible. Sending them to schools helps. At the end of the day, watching a guy who understands and knows what to do and learning from them, that's the only way you're going to get really good at the job. That's it right there.
That's a great point, Tom. And I think if you're a law enforcement officer listening to all this stuff, what are the takeaways? And the takeaways should definitely include: don't leave it up to your agency to provide you all the training that you think you'll ever need. Your agency is not responsible for your career, much less your safety, much less your expertise. So would highly encourage you, if you're a police officer, to seek out your own training, read the books, consume the articles, take the classes, whatever you can do to gather that extra information as you're building your experience, like he was just saying. And I've got to jump off the call, but I just would leave just some of these essential questions maybe for the audience and the panel is, as we start asking more and more of law enforcement officers, right, we're diluting their talents. In other words, we can only make cops experts in certain things. We want cops to be experts now in use of force, human trafficking, terrorism, investigation, CSI, you name it. At some point, the backpack is full, and they'll start to become, their skills will degrade at all those things. Perhaps it's time we ask just police officers to be good at a small number of things, use of force being one of them, right? And kind of really drill down, hey, cops, we just want you to be really good at these things. We're not going to have you be experts at everything. The other thing is that here in America, in the United States of America, there is a seldom understood legal doctrine that is worth every police officer looking at and perhaps even police critics understanding. It's this: as much as we write protect and serve on the side of police cars, the police in the United States do not have an affirmative legal duty to provide police protection to individuals. That means that they're under no legal obligation to protect you. They're no under legal obligation to even respond to 911 calls. Shocking, controversial, true. And you don't want to take my word for it because you don't even know me. If you're a police officer in the United States, you want to look up a couple of cases. Warren versus the District of Columbia is the most often cited public duty doctrine case. The first one is actually South versus Maryland. South versus Maryland. The public duty doctrine. Do the police even have a legal duty to protect individuals? They don't. And I say that for this reason. We're going to get to a place in society where police officers are going to stop acting. Not because of the reasons you hear about, the slowdown, the shutdown, the society doesn't like us, going to slow down. They're going to start to realize they don't have to act in a huge amount of circumstances. So they're going to choose not to. And can you imagine a society where you call 911 and you're saying this crazy thing and say, this guy's trying to break into my house, or this thing's happened to me, and the cops all go, we don't have a legal duty to act, and we don't have many legal protections anymore, so we're actually not going to act. We're here. We're going to surround your house. We'll wait till SWAT gets here. Eventually we'll get in there. I understand the guy's stabbing you, but that's a dangerous, dangerous time to get into when cops really start going, let's take a step back here and look at what we legally have to do and don't, and let's just only act in certain ways. As a society, myself included, I don't want my local police to act like that. So my hat's off to all the folks on the panel and Adam for putting this together, of course, and all the smart folks and Lon and Dr. Lewsinski and the rest of you. And thank you for letting me be part of the conversation and interrupting you, which I'm doing right now. And if you ever need anything from me, or there's something I can do, I'm sure Adam can can put my contact information in there, and the Savage Training Group's here to help. More importantly, I'm a police officer, which means I'm indebted to all the other police officers out there, and just want to do whatever I can to help you. So,
Scott, thanks, brother. I mean, thank you for taking the time, jumping on with us. It's always an honor and a privilege. Thanks for leaving us on such a high, positive note. Really appreciate that. And
sorry for the gloom and doom.
I just want to say something, Scott. The future you are foreseeing for your country is the present that we have in Europe. That's something I was about to share with you. I don't know if you have time to listen to this, but
yes, go ahead.
The point is that for us, the choice of violence is almost a no choice, and de-escalation is more like a stall. Police officers in my country and throughout Europe, I can say, are more looking for a stall, for a de-escalation by default, because the option of violence has been taken away from them many, many years ago. Or we don't have that culture of getting into a scene and start shooting just to protect, for a legit shooting, that for what would have been called a legit shooting in the US. So we do not have that option, or that option is very, very limited. Stalling, talking, de-escalating, as you were describing before, is basically the way of going for us here, which is very complicated. And time is not an issue. I was reading the comments in the public section, and someone was mentioning the time for doing the de-escalation and all the process to try to stop the violent action from the bad guys. But this is what we are dealing since forever, and that does not come from schools or academy for police officers. It's more into their mindset. And I am afraid to say that I'm not certain if they are doing so because they are more afraid of being put into a trial if they opt for the violent choice, or if it's just a mindset of trying to respect the bad guy and trying to de-escalate to the point he stopped committing the crime and maybe he goes away and they chase him and stuff like that. We are getting better at chasing or our after-action investigations more than actually intervening into the scene during the violent intercourse. I don't know if you got the point, but your future, as I started to say, is our present right now.
So we're all doomed, is what you're saying.
Awesome. Even more positive note. Thank you, Jacopo. I'm gonna pour another scotch. Everybody, please feel free to join me. Scott, thanks always, brother. I'll touch base with you after this, but thank you so much for taking the time, man. I really appreciate it.
Okay, guys.
Thanks
very much. Thank you for having me. Okay, bye-bye.
I know there's a few other points here. Luann asked a question here. So Luann Hamlin came up with a question on the chat. She said, what if agencies will not allow officers to attend training outside of the department? Some want to control what goes in the minds of their officers. So I'll cue that one up for you guys.
It's insane when you hear that, right? But we know it happens. We've seen it. I've seen it. Agencies literally will ban or outlaw training that they don't necessarily agree with. And I had a former chief that would not allow training from a really high-end, very well-known special operations operator that was big in the industry. He just refused to let any officers on their own time, which, then you start dealing with the legal aspects of that. Can you do that? And where does that line get drawn? Am I allowed to go to martial arts training? Can I do jujitsu? What about Muay Thai? Am I allowed to box? Where does that line start to get drawn? And I don't know, man, that's a slippery slope when you have people controlling what you do on your off time when it comes to athletic activities or even just knowledge.
That's a fantastic point, because that's something that always comes up when I know we've done use of force and defensive tactics roundtables in the past. And the conversation has come up, well, my agency says that we can only train this certain style or this certain method or this certain tactic, but I go and do things on my own. Maybe I study Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, maybe I do Thai boxing, maybe I do Krav, maybe it's something different. And it's, am I going to get in trouble for utilizing that technique on the street, even because it goes against technically what our agency policies and procedures are? And I want to bring that into this conversation on the firearm side of things, because there are a lot of officers, I won't say a lot, but there are officers that go out and do training on their own in firearms, where they'll go to a Matt, or they'll go to a Pat McNamara, or they'll go to a Tim Kennedy and learn more advanced shooting skills that aren't necessarily sanctioned by their departments. Is that dangerous for them to do that?
I wouldn't think so, because, I mean, for number one, shooting is shooting, right? I mean, it's, as long as you're following the use of force policy of your department, the actual technical skill of shooting shouldn't be an issue. But I had something else I wanted to say on this too, is that I think a lot of times in law enforcement, we have this misconception that training is something you do only in a course, right? Training only occurs when you're with an instructor in a formal environment. But the majority of your training as a professional should be done on your own. I mean, you get ideas, techniques, tactics, principles, concepts from a course, and you bring them back to your own training. So if you want to be a professional, if you want to be a master of your craft, you should have a training program on your own. You should be working out on your own. You should be, doing some sort of combative defensive tactics on your own. You should have a dry fire regimen, a live fire regimen. It's not up to anyone else to do that for you. And it doesn't matter if you go to 5 or 6 training classes a year. If you never do any work on your own in between them, you're only going to get to a certain level. You'll never maximize your potential or ability without doing that. So I think that we need to take that responsibility on ourselves, not the department, not the courses we attend. It's great to go to courses and learn, but if you don't internalize those lessons and bring them back and work on them on your own, it's only going to give you so much.
100% agree with everything he's saying. 80% of everything I did when I was on the job was on my own. And some of those courses were way outside the box. Now, agencies discourage officers from doing training on their own in other ways. Like financially, they would not support what I was doing. I went to a sniper school at Camp Pendleton with it was a 6-day Marine Corps Scout Sniper School. It was a condensed school that they did on Camp Pendleton on the Santa Ana Fray side. And the way they discouraged it was, we're not going to give you match ammunition. We're not going to give you time off. You're going to have to take vacation. You're going to have to pay for your lodging. You're going to have to pay for your vehicle. And I hand loaded 500 rounds of match ammunition, which is a good thing to do, right? Good thing to learn. And that was a way of discouraging it. A lot of agencies go to the bare minimum. At the end of the day, there's a requirement from ASPOST or CPOST or whatever. I got to admit, my agency went above and beyond that in a lot of ways. But you're right. They don't have to support you in any other way. They don't have to, give you any other training. It took one of our officers crashing a car 3 times, and they were about to suspend him. And then he said, well, wait a minute. I haven't had Code 3 driving in 14 years. And they saw liability, and then they got the training. And that's a way you can kind of encourage your agency and say, hey, we have an issue here, and it's going to cost you millions of dollars. Let's spend a few thousand or $10,000 to get it sorted out before it gets worse. But at the end of the day, you're right. That 100% agree that, with what Matt's saying, you got to train on your own. It is set you on the path, but it is not the end all be all. And most officers, let's be honest, go to training, they do it, and then they don't pick up the weapon until they got to qualify or do something else. And we had that problem. And if they got into a serious incident, that they weren't going to be as effective as they should be.
James K brought in a pretty interesting question or statement where they operate under the premise that any technique doesn't matter as long as the level of force is justified. And I think you can really get into a philosophical debate on that. I've defended officers that agencies have tried to hang them up. But the question is, okay, the first question is, were you trained by your agency to do this? And if that's a yes, under circumstances, then probably the liability of that falls under the umbrella of the agency. If the answer is no, then the question becomes, well, was it objectively reasonable? At least currently, that's the appropriate question. That could change. So first, were you trained to do that? And then the second question is, well, was it objectively reasonable under the circumstances? And then you start running into a lot of time. I would argue 99% of the time, we really deal with a dynamic application of a tactic or technique, which means it's not even close to what we did on the mat because there's so many other things that are going on. But I think that's an interesting question. And I think that you really got to figure that one out. I'm a big union guy. I was, president and vice president and, did a bunch of stuff. I think that's where some of those associations can help clarify and offer some protection that is really probably needed.
I'd like to take a step back for the conversations because it ties into what everybody's saying. And it's to the group, but I think it's also to the group of instructors that are typing in the comments. And it stems from Matt's comment about, at some point the student, and to Lou Hamlin's comments, which a lot of them aren't going to necessarily do that. Some students will make a choice to be that person that goes and constantly changes their mindset, that constantly seeks and is the warrior philosopher, the warrior monk, whatever term you want to give it. Now, what's interesting about that is I want all the instructors that are on this roundtable to think back, and I want you to imagine that recruit that was the person always asking the questions, the person that said, I'm trying to understand. But a lot of times we, even as instructors, will say, but that's not the way we do it. You just have to knuckle down and do it this way and this type of stuff. There is a balancing test about that person that is constantly inquisitive to become the lifelong learner and what we have time to give them and everything else, and the way we approach that person in a academy setting or even in a future setting on the mat. Hey, Bob, you're just here to get your certification done, so just freaking knock it out. So what I would offer to that is, and this stems from Scott's conversation, is there is value in simply adjusting the frame. So if you remember, Scott was, and I think it's a very good conversation about the idea of de-escalation being a verb or a noun and offering. We offer it. But if you take a step back from a systems perspective, what are we trying to do in this situation? What is the frame? What is our desired outcome? Well, I don't want to get hurt. I don't want my other people to get hurt. I want to make sure, if I can, that the person that's threatening others comes to the least amount of harm as feasible. Well, it sounds like we're all in the same sheet of music. We're all trying to get to the same place. And once you change the frame, de-escalation at that point is just another tool in the toolbox. You can call whatever you want. And the word Saturday Night Live is a dessert topping and a floor wax, dating myself. But the idea here is, a lot of times what we can do as instructors is be very wary of our own frames and the frames that we impart on students. So I would offer to the group here and also the group in the comments, how many times have we as instructors potentially almost stifled the lifelong learner? So that's my question to the group. This would be the interactive part for you guys that are sitting there. Holy God, man. Lon, you always have something to say.
I know. I always run my mouth in the time I'm
Come
like,
on. Okay, I'm going to go in the
else.
back. I have a dog. It's an Anatolian. I can put a freaking horn on it and make it into an elephant if you want, so you can just ride it around for everybody.
You know what, though? I think we do. I think we crush a lot of people's dreams, not just, lifelong learners, but I think we break students. When I took over our firearms program many, many moons ago, I had a lieutenant confide in me that when they went to the range for training, they got so nervous and so wired up that sometimes they would pull their vehicle over and they'd throw up because the instructional staff got into that mindset of, well, we got to stress everybody out. And I get out there and I'm watching, what the training is. I'm a young officer initially, and I had to deal with it. But then when I took over, I got to make some changes. And they would, you know, get behind people. They'd be yelling and screaming at the shooter and, you know, trying to just ass them up as much as possible. And when I asked the question, well, why do you do that? Well, the answer was, well, because gunfights are stressful. We need to really stress them out. I said, yeah. I said, but in general, the stress is coming from a specific location. And I have the capability, in theory, if I have the skill set, to mitigate that stress by proper application of a little vitamin lead. If in a real environment, you had somebody pop up behind you, the threat is downrange. I hate that. But the threat's downrange and somebody pops up behind you and is yelling and screaming in your ear, what would you do? Well, I'd punch him in the mouth and I'd handcuff him and all this other stuff. It's like, great. Just so you know, I'm going to start telling every single student that if an instructor pulls that on you, lay them out, because now we're going to train for real. But we had instructors doing that forever because they didn't understand stress. They didn't understand adult learning. They didn't understand how our body and our brains really truly react and respond. But I think you're right. I think we can crush our students. We can crush our instructors, depending upon how we treat them. And we have to be very careful in that.
I think there's a key here, right? There's an important thing here. And I think this will kind of segue into your background, Lon, too. So I think this is something you'll have a lot to say on. These things are all at their heart athletic skills. And yet, for some reason, in the military and law enforcement, when we put a gun in somebody's hand, we think the laws of athletic performance, both physiological and psychological, no longer apply. And they still do. You wouldn't train a beginning athlete by yelling and screaming at them and expect them to pick up a fine motor skill. You wouldn't expect that to happen. So why do we do it with shooters? The time to layer in stress and all those other distractors is after we have built the skills. Then we're testing the skills. But you don't build a skill the same way you test it, or you never get good at it.
Alexander?
Oh.
Yeah, I'm glad that Matt just said something about bringing in stress there too, because I think there's a lot of misnomers about what we're trying to accomplish with our students versus what we're actually accomplishing with them. And when we're talking about creating stress in them, I'm not sure that we're really doing them a service by creating, I'm going to call it the wrong kind of stress. And I'm not sure I have the right words to describe it, but there's ways to teach people better coping mechanisms and resiliency. And it's usually not by standing next to them and screaming in their ear or threatening them. And then the other thing I just wanted to touch on is that we need to remember as instructors to bring our own learning experiences into how we're teaching our students. And what I mean by that is remembering that first day of the academy, remembering that first day on the range when we didn't know what the hell we were doing, and how our instructors approached us. Because I think a lot of times you learn as much about how you don't want to teach as much as you do. You learn about how you do want to teach from some of the people you go to. And that's another good reason to go and get outside of your own department and get into training classes from a variety of people so that you don't end up with that myopic view of just your departmental philosophy. And I'm not saying good or bad, but I think that anything that keeps you so focused and so inward focused is not going to serve you in the long run about just being realistic about life and making sure that you can approach those people and talk to people the way we've been discussing about having to have conversations to effectively offer somebody de-escalation. You have to be able to discuss with them and bring various points of view in. So I know that was a lot of different stuff, but I'm sure you guys can pick it up and offer some more.
We've been arguing for decades that exposure to stress is not stress inoculation. Just like exposure to virus does not develop inoculation. There has to be a particular process, and there's a growth experience within the human body that develops inoculation. And that allows you to counteract exposure to the virus. Well, similarly, exposure to stress does not build an inoculation of stress. It is what's going on inside the mind, brain of the officer, and particularly the attentional process of the officer. And the more we get into this, the more we're learning that attention rules. To quote one of my old professors, we have very little space in our brains for anything. And we've called that cognitive load. Thank you, Ron, tonight. We've called that cognitive load, but we have very little working memory. That's why we see you can't drive a car and talk on a cell phone at the same time, is because we really don't have that much working space. So if we learn how to focus on the task at hand, and that ability to concentrate, to become attuned to what is relevant, and to build the skill to automaticity, so that what we're doing automatically, and our brains are free to focus on what we need to see and what we need to do, which is, there's very little of that going on in the police world. There's very little what's going on in training between the ears of the officer, and there's very little training that reaches that level of automatic performance of the skill. And if you want new frontiers for training, I suggest those are the frontiers. How do we build in time compressed and dollar restricted areas the level of skill needed to perform effectively? And how do we build the attentional process so the officer is aware, knows what, where, when, and how things are unfolding, focuses on the right things, and then really makes the decision? When we look at, in the state of Minnesota, for instance, our officers will get anywhere from 3 to 5 forced decisions before they graduate, and we put them on the street on a squad car. And there's no profession that does clinical decision-making that has so little training in such an important area. I would not go to a professional that has only learned how to make 5 decisions around the areas I need them to work with me on. And yet we do that. We condemn our officers to perform under those levels of experience and training. And if there's any frontier for us, it is that frontier. Emotional management, emotional regulation, decision-making, and skill building. That's really what this profession, this area is all about, and it's where we need to be focused.
Doc, do you think that experiential learning is probably the best way to bring all of those in?
I think it's important, but I think also that there's some things that you can do a lot offline besides experiential learning, whether it's in a simulator or simulations or anything. I just think there's a lot we can do offline, assuming people are willing to do that. And I was, again, listening to Matt talk about how the myth in the profession is we fight like we train. But if we treat it as an athletic skill, my university was home of the Minnesota Vikings. I watched them do field drills with no pads on. I watched them run plays. I watched them build skills. I watched them in the weight room. These guys did a lot of offline learning that really built their skills on the competition field, despite the fact that sometimes we haven't demonstrated those skills so well. But they've done a lot of offline learning, and I think we can really do that. In fact, I'm thinking we can teach firearm skills and emotional regulation right from the beginning of the academy if we really get good at getting rid of the block and silo, beginning to integrate motor skills with lessons. So when we take forced decision-making, whether it's common law and policy or whatever, we don't take a multiple choice exam. We really put people in scenarios. We have them make decisions with what it is that we're helping them do.
So real quickly, I know there's a lot of people that want to jump in on this. So I think Matt wants to follow up on the athletic angle, just as part of this conversation. And then I know Jacopo has a question for Bill as well. So Matt, we'll let you follow the athletic angle, and then I'll go to Jacopo.
All right. So first off, you just both hit one of my biggest pet peeves, the old saw, train like you fight, because that makes me crazy. And you use the same analogy I use when I talk to SWAT teams all the time. There's no professional football team that puts on the pads for every minute of every practice. And yet you see SWAT teams all across the country that think you have to kit up in full kit to do basic shooting drills. And that's not the way athletes train. And we should look at building skill the same way, I think. But I have a question for you, Doctor. And here's the thing, like what separates, I'm gonna give a supposition first and then ask the question. So what separates a guy in an SMU, whether you're talking about green or blue, CAG or Dev Group, right, from a guy in a part-time SWAT team that's competent and gifted? What separates them is the ability to handle the athletic skills, the athletic tasks they have to do at a level of subconscious competence, so that then their awareness is opened up and they can be aware of the entire environment, make the right decisions, look at what their teammates are doing, adjust and shift as need be, because they can handle those skills automatically. Where somebody who's maxed out on just the shooting and where they put their feet and hitting their corner doesn't have the same awareness of what's going on. So given the limited time, the limited resources, because like speaking from personal experience, it took me years and thousands of repetitions to build those skills to that subconscious competence level. How do we get that to people faster? I'd love your input on this because it's something that I'm really working on in the classes I teach, and I'd love to hear what you have to say on it.
Well, Lon and I have spent a fair amount of time over some good Pinot Noir, purchased speaking about this. And, there's a variety of things that we can do, including, I'm a firm believer in, I happen to have a really old Glock training gun here that we purchased, and it's part of what we equipped with accelerometers and did some research on. But there's a lot of training you can do with manipulation with weapons and decision making, totally apart from range stuff, as you're talking about. And what we know is that if you practice skills less, you actually get better at them. And and I know you weren't saying this in the section I was listening to, but it was implied there, is less training with more mindfulness, particularly that focuses on a particular skill. You were talking about isolating units and teaching them in small chunks and studying what you're weak at so that you can then put it together with the skill. If we can take stuff offline and begin to work in that fashion and really start, as I said, building weapon skills, trigger press, weapon alignment, coming up, that stuff doesn't have to be done on a range. We buy everybody in the academy a sim gun, a red gun, blue gun, a cert gun, and do a lot of practice and do a lot of decision making with the gun in hand. But we do it in short chunks so that we never get fatigued. And I know with lifting, and this is Lon's area, with lifting, if you do one heavy lift once, you go lift again, you've now changed the sequencing of muscle competition or coordination. And so you really need to look at, how do I maximize my training time? And boy, if there's another area we could spend a lot of time on, it's a concentration, it's a quality of training, and it's a mindfulness of the learner. I was looking at some of the comments offline too, and there's no question that people in law enforcement do not appreciate what trainers give to them. And we need to recruit the mind and the attention of the learner more so than the motor skills. Because you can practice a skill 1,000 times, and if you're not into it, it's not going to change anything that's going to affect your level of performance. So it's all about that mind stuff that I think is really critical. And one of the things we're just learning, and we're really focused a lot on this in the last couple of years, is a consolidation of motor skills with sleep. And particularly if you work a skill for a short period of time, within 6 hours, 4 hours of sleep, you wake up. Some of the studies out of Harvard say you can wake up 20, 30% better than when you went to bed, because your brain doesn't rest at night. It's working and consolidating our experiences and our procedural memory, which is our skill-based memory, when we sleep. I know one academy in one state, it's a chief state academy, and they may not be doing it now, but they were keeping their recruits up one night every single week of the academy to clean ammo and the rest of that, to develop character or whatever it was. They destroyed all the learning that occurred on the day before, and they destroyed all the learning that occurred the following day, because we need sleep to consolidate our learning. So we need attention, we need sleep. There's a lot of stuff that we could do to really build great learning and work within the same time frames and dollar frames that we now are limited to.
And I think this a couple things you said really resonated with me. One was the mindfulness aspect, right? And this goes full circle back around to what we were talking about with Stoicism and Zen and all of that and how martial artists train, is that you have to be mindful in your practice. Empty reps aren't going to make you better. You have to be very aware of everything that is going on and take that input and be mindful in the practice. And I just think that is so underrated. I mean, simply walking through the motions happens so often.
I would agree. And whether it's a mindfulness on a movement, so it's an internal broad, or whether it's a mindfulness on the trigger press and the recycle and the reset, internal narrow. We really need to be focused on that, and then the eye-brain stuff on the visual motor coordination.
And then like all the studies on interleaving practice, where you learn better if you, instead of doing block practice, where you're doing a long period of time on one thing, if you're going back and forth from skill to skill in short little sessions, you're actually getting better at what you're doing, what you're working on. And
there's science behind that.
Yep. And like for my competitive shooting stuff, like my competition gun is never loaded with live rounds except at a match. So it's safe to dry fire whenever I want. I'll walk around the house with that gun all the time. I call it my fidget gun. And in between things, I'll pick it up for a moment in between working on a laptop or talking on the phone or whatever work I have to do for my business or for Staccato. I'll pick it up and do some trigger presses and some transitions or some reloads throughout the day multiple times. And I get huge skill benefits from that. And it's not that I don't do longer practice sessions of dry fire, I do, but I almost think that the fidget gun is actually more important to progress than the hour of dry fire I do first thing in the morning in a lot of ways.
It's interesting you say that, Matt. When I've had the opportunity to interview a lot of competitive shooters, well, not a lot, but a few competitive shooters, guys like Brandon Wright, Ark Levy, and both of them mentioned the exact same thing that you said. They have a gun lying around their house, and they'll walk around and they have little targets set up on like a little piece of tape set on a wall or something, and they'll practice everything from target acquisition to trigger pull and everything all the time when they're walking around their house. So I think that's it, but again, very, very competitive people, right? I mean, they're competitors. That's built into them. Luann mentioned something that equated SF operators to professional athletes in that they're very highly motivated. They set a very high standard for themselves, which is why you get a lot of that buy-in, which is what all of you were talking about, is how do we get the buy-in from the student so that they want to learn, so that they're attentive, and then they're actually going to retain the knowledge. Real quickly, before I kick this back to you guys, Bill brought up sleep and how important sleep was. If you haven't already checked it out, today on the conference, there was a session from Dr. Charles Samuels for the Center of Sleep up here in Canada. That session is all about sleep and how important sleep is for law enforcement and for first responders. So if you haven't already checked that out, make sure to go and watch that entire session. It's very, very good information there. So sorry, I'm going to cut it back to you guys.
Being almost 3 a.m. here, I think I'm good about the sleep right now. I'm scared of what Bill was saying about the sleep, because tomorrow I won't recall this thing. By the way, Doc, I was inspired by your discussion about the stress, and I was relating that to the work that we do as instructor when we need to design exercises. And I'll come up with two assumptions. First, we are always and everyone low budget, so we don't have either time or money. That means that we don't have that much range time or ammunition money and whatever. And second assumption, we are no fan of 80s style, yelling at the students, Sergeant Hartman things, the things that Sasha was mentioning before. That's something that really doesn't make any good for the stress style of exercise. So my question, because I'm thinking on designing exercise for my students with Paolo in a short time, short exercise, how to build up the stress for them. What is your suggestion? Would you go for physical stress, with that meaning either performance for the body or pain, psychological stress, or competitive stress, for example, for team racing, team matching, or any mix-up of those mentioned. Which one is the most beneficial in a short frame, 5-minute exercise, and we still need to build up some stress into the exercise for the student? I don't know if I'm clear with the question.
Yeah, my awareness of the research and we're doing actually a number of studies right now in Utah on arousal in high stress situations, combat situations, and we're looking at the type of pulse, the wave within the pulse, and the interbeat variability. And there is no question that there is very little correlation with the pulse generated by physical activity and the pulse driven by stress. So if you want to look at creating stress, we're encouraging you to look at psychological stress. And I'm not diminishing physical stress, because learning how to shoot under physical exertion, we've worked with some teams, for instance, defending particular really important infrastructures, and they may have to run as much as a mile to engage the assailant who's attacking the infrastructure. And the ability to operate under that level of physical distress is really very demanding. It's a very high level of fitness required to do it. But the operation of the body and the brain is really different. On the other hand, when we had our officers on a traffic stop or in a domestic situation and they're assaulted with a firearm, their pulse level is really different. And it skyrockets very quickly. The pulse speed is different. But what determines that is what's going on in the officer's brain and the arousal and the startle reflexive response that goes with that. And we need to develop other sorts of things, including how to regulate emotional stress and emotional arousal under stress conditions. So I strongly encourage you to look at whatever psychological stress you could put officers under. And that includes being a member of a team, having the team count on you. So instead of individual scores, we do group scores, and we put social pressure on people, because our reputations is threatened. Sometimes our arousal is almost as high as if our life is threatened. And so there's a variety of ways we can introduce psychological stress and cognitive stress, as John is pointing out, by high load conditions, high cognitive load, complex factors. So I would strongly encourage that as a process.
And beside those, would you consider psychological stress if we impair the capability of the student's body, like eyesight, vision, hearing, or maybe breathing, which is not a sense, but still, would you consider that some ignition for the stress beside the psychological of social stress? You were mentioning, the team and stuff, and the reputation. That's a social kind of stress. Would you also consider as psychological the things that I was mentioning before, like again the ability of using the full aspects of the body?
Okay, let me give you the latest cutting edge on emotional regulation. There's a part of the brain called the frontal orbital lobe, and it's in this area of the frontal cortex. And it has a direct connection to the amygdala. And I mentioned I've interviewed thousands of officers, and what is very interesting about those thousands of officers, and by the way, I want to talk about a force recon guy that I interviewed back from Vietnam in the 70s. Dynamite performance under amazing combat conditions. And one of the things that was characteristic of every single person I've interviewed that has done really well under high stress is their focus on getting the job done. And that focus comes out of here. It comes out of the part of the brain that controls our emotional arousal. We can learn how to focus, and we can learn how to look and see. And there's a great deal of relationship between those two. Because when you are regulating your vision to see what you need to accomplish, the interesting thing is your amygdala is actually suppressed. The functioning of your emotional arousal is reduced the more you focus visually and intentionally on trying to accomplish something that's really important under this high level of stress. And I don't think we spend enough time teaching people to look and see, how to look and analyze, how to coordinate motor units together. So it's called vision action coupling. You know, one of the things that we're beginning to discover, and some of the guys on this are much better at it personally than I would, but from the literature, it is very clear. If you focus visually on something, you can drive your hand right to that point. And if you had a gun in there and you focus visually, it's the same thing. You get amazingly good when you link your eye to what you need to accomplish and how it connects to your motor performance and also to your emotional regulation. It's all about learning how to work our frontal lobes and how to build that control under high stress. And that's inoculation. It is not screaming and hollering at people. It's not making them do push-ups. It's not insulting them and putting peer pressure, just beating them down, criticizing them. It's giving them the capacity to cope with that. That is really stress inoculation.
I've got a sorry. I had a couple things I just had to say on this one for Dr. Lewinski. One is going back to the competition thing, right? A big thing competition shooters say is that vision drives your shooting. And I found that to be true for tactics as well. If you look at where you need to go, what you need to do, you can easily get kind of into that flow state, that zone, and just get right there. But the other thing I wanted to add about stress, I want to get your opinion on this, because I can tell you from not just personal experience, but from my friends with similar backgrounds, guys that have seen combat and have also competed in shooting, I have never been as stressed in a gunfight, either overseas or in the States, as I have been at a shooting match that mattered to me. And it's funny how much stress that competition can actually induce. And that's one of the things I use in my classes to get people to shoot under stress, because physical stress is different. Push-ups, sit-ups, burpees, all that stuff, that can simulate the stress of an infill, but that is not psychological stress the same way. And for me, looking bad in front of my peers is way more of a potential stressor than being yelled at or screamed at or anything like that. And it's far more stress than I've ever experienced in an actual gunfight. What are your thoughts?
I think you've given it, you're right there. I'm pointing out that ego stress could be even a higher level for us than life and death stress. And there's no question that learning how to operate under stress, whether it's ego stress or life and death stress, is the same. It's what Lon calls mission focus. It's really focusing on what you need to do in this situation and being able to do that above all else, to damp down the noise that's going in your brain and focus on what you need to do. And have the skills there so you can really focus on the decision making you need to, but the skills are automatic in whatever it is you're doing, whether it's a takedown technique or anything else. I mean, you know, I was listening to you talk about what I'm talking about today. Last night I was listening to a podcast and thinking, this guy's been there and knows a lot. And I've got the research behind it to say, you're right.
So I'd like to go back to about 5:36 p.m. when Dan put a comment up, and I think we have a really good cadre here. Lou and Mike and everybody else has been responding to it, and to give the other instructors a chance, Dan posed a question: how do you inspire and motivate students that don't want to be at firearms training? And I think this ties in And I'm going to offer my first thoughts on that, and then I'm going to ask everybody else to chime in too, because Matt's a competitive shooter. We've got a lot of the same background and that kind of stuff. We don't have to be motivated. We've made a conscious choice to be who we are. You guys out there as firearms instructors have probably done the same. Or honestly, you wouldn't be sitting here late at night trying to listen to other people pontificate. But what about those that are not? And we're not judging those people. It's neither right nor wrong. Judgment really doesn't help a lot. And I'll offer the first thing as a salvo across the transom, so to speak. The first thing I usually do is I learn the language of the student. You play golf, we'll talk centrifugal force and clubs. You play tennis, you do this, you do that. You like driving, you like fishing. And again, much like what Scott talked about, I was a hostage negotiator as well, is I need to learn your language. And what that does is it, one, establishes a sense of empathy with you, and it's a form of respect. You don't have to change your language to fit me. I will find a way to translate my concepts into your language. And then if I can find out what motivates you and what you consider important, maybe it's your family or that, my job then is to link what we're doing today as an instructor to something that has value, that you value as a student. So I learn a lot of different languages. And this goes back to the earlier conversation where Lon and other people talked about, Jacopo did as well, is we need to go out. I'm a member of Society of Decision Professionals. I just finished presenting at Society of Criminal and Police Psychologists. The reason I do that is I seek areas that people think different than I do. It's sometimes uncomfortable, but it's what we have to do as an instructor. And what I do is I learn a lot of different languages. And by learning those different languages, I can bring that back, because at the end of the day, my job is to allow the student to grow and to, we already had the concept of flow, but the idea here is good training is play. Good training is experimentation and play. And in order to do that, we have to create a comfort in the student. BC Marshall, 3285, you're absolutely right. It's a tricky part of the art to craft, inspire, to reduce anxiety. And Lon already mentioned the reduction of anxiety, but then at the same time, we have to have that art and science of layering on stimulus. And I use the word stimulus as compared to stress, because stimulus is designed or is crafted, if we do it correctly, to create growth. If I hammer a bone that's recalcifying, I stimulate it to the point where it's getting more calcification. And then once we do that, we then get layers of calcification and the bone becomes stronger. If we apply too much stimulus, we bring them all the way back to freaking ground zero. If we apply too little, no growth occurs. And it's that thing about what the instructors are talking about. So again, that's my take on Dan's question. I'd offer it up to the rest of the group.
One thing I do want to bring up real quickly, because you brought it up and it made me think of somebody who couldn't make this roundtable, which I'm really disappointed about, was Chris Butler. Yep. And I know John and I had this conversation just the other day, actually, just randomly. We get on the phone all the time, but we were talking about, and he brought up the same concept about using language in finding your students' language. That's something that there's no person in the world that I think does better than Chris Butler. I remember for the Islet summit that we ran, he explained concepts to me in a way that I've never seen before. And what he'll do is he'll take a concept, but then he'll explain it in 3, 4, 5 different ways to make sure that the person understands it, whether you're a tennis player or a golfer or a baseball player or you're a pianist or whatever it is that's your passion. He'll take that and translate the information so that you can understand the core concepts first before getting into more detailed discussions about it. And it kind of brings me into something that I want to jump into is he's put together a training course for instructors that I believe is going to be in collaboration with Force Science as well. That is second to none. And so shout out to Chris. Sorry that you couldn't make it, but obviously I want to give him a shout out. But also I do want to just take a quick second to talk about For Science, because I do want to do a giveaway here before we forget about it. So the Realistic De-Escalation Instructor course that's held by For Science, there's a few people on this panel that have already been through the course. They can attest to how amazing it is. And obviously we have one of the creators here with us. It's a 2-day course, $500 value, and we're going to give one of these away to somebody here listening live. So what I would pose to the panel is, does anybody have a skill testing question based off of the topics we've just discussed that you think would be relevant to see who can get it right and win the prize?
Define Hicks law.
All right.
Three people get on a bus. How far did the bus travel from Chicago? Yeah, nice.
Okay, so first person to throw in a acceptable definition of Hicks law into the chat, you're going to win a free de-escalation course from the team at For Science, courtesy of Dr. Bill Lewinski. So thank you, Bill, for that. And Lon, I'm going to just ask you to monitor the chat, and you let me know which one answered it correctly. So I'm going to let you guys jump back into the conversation on what John had said, and open it back up to you guys. Alexander?
Yeah, I just had something real quick, and it was a leadership course that I went to last year. And of course, I think as good instructors, we're all trying to keep learning and keep figuring out, hey, what's the best technique and how can I reach my students? And it may sound obvious to other people, but it was eye-opening for me to figure out that, hey, you can't teach somebody motivation. We've gotten into this whole thing, like when I went through my first instructor school, it's like, you have to motivate people. And you can't. It's an internal thing that needs to come from inside your students. And I think John hit it right on the head about figuring out ways to connect with your students and to be empathetic, to figure out their language and to figure out where they're coming from. And that also goes to us listening more as instructors than just saying things that are on our minds, and making sure that we're really hearing and picking up on what our students are throwing out there. And again, I think that kind of wraps into the whole concept of all these things don't happen in a vacuum. And we need to make sure that we're that again, we're truly hearing people and making sure that we're in tune with what our students want. And I really like what they were saying too about finding other points of view. And I think oftentimes we're conflating understanding with agreement. And by demonstrating understanding and trying to understand different points of view, we expand our worlds as instructors immensely. Again, being able to get in touch with, if we want to talk about millennials, or we want to talk about whatever the current generation is and how out of touch some of us think that they are, by understanding them better, not agreeing with their style, we can reach them and we can get them on board with finding their motivation to want to be better at firearms, better at combatives, better at talking to people, and integrating all these things. So if anybody has thoughts on those topics.
I'll be completely honest with you. I mean, I've taught a broad variety of folks. The civilians that want to pay and come to you, they're actually invested in something. There's no motivation issue in a civilian, right? You got that. They pay to be there. They want to be there. When you're teaching those initial onsets of presentation and trigger press and all that stuff, they're getting those fine details, no issues there. But there's two motivations in a professional setting that you normally get. They're broad and they're not always the same, but there's one who shows up, and I'm going to use firearms just because that's an easy one. They need to qualify for the job. They just want to get through, right? And then there's the guy who's there who understands that this is going to save my life or the life of another officer, right? It's not necessarily a life-taking skill, although that happens. It's about supporting my team. And those guys are motivated already. That's easy. The guy who just wants to get through the qual, or they have to check the box. I had military guys that were support staff sometimes, and it was pretty obvious that they've got 2 weeks left and they are about to, head overseas, and the last place they want to be is on a range learning something. And you got to motivate those guys. Hey, well, I'm support staff. You're wearing a uniform. You're going to end up over there. They can't tell you apart from anybody else. You're going to get shot at too. It's a very individual thing to motivate somebody. Sometimes it's ego. The guy next to them is shooting better. Hey, you're going to let him do that to you? I mean, to get them to perform, but they have to walk into it with the right mindset. And, the guys that understand that this is a serious business, those are going to be easy to train, to be honest with you. I had an officer show up to the line. He's like, man, if I didn't have to carry a gun, I wouldn't. Maybe he's in the wrong profession to begin with. The only thing I can really do to drive him to do the right thing is, well, you need to do this to keep your job. But to be honest with you, you need to do this to keep me alive. This is a big deal. It might be you who's going to have to take the shot, not me. And that's a very difficult person to deal with. And you're right. You do have to speak their language. But let's face it, you're going to get those guys that sometimes just don't want to be there. And that's the reality of it. And you've got to do the best you can. And hopefully they don't drag down the guys next to them that do want to be there, that take it professionally. So that's just my 2 cents.
I believe we have an answer to the skill testing question. And now, listen, I'm gonna propose this with the caveat. A lot of you answered the question and you answered it correctly. But since this is a group of instructors, I'm basically looking for the most detailed and full definition. And so we're gonna have to go with Mike Lazarus, who basically said the time it takes a person to make a decision as a result of possible choices he or she has that increases the number of choices, they will increase the decision time logarithmically. So that's out of all of them, that was the most complete definition of it. So I think that's one we're going to go with. And I'll put it up to the panel. Does everybody agree? Or getting a thumbs up? Do you guys agree with that? All right. Awesome. Okay. So Mike, congratulations. Stay tuned. I already have your email, so I'll be in touch with you after this event. I'm going to kick it back into you guys with what was just said. Anybody remember? Or
yeah. So
yeah, I just throw
I think the issue is really, and I almost hate to say this, the issue is really a selection issue when it comes to the people that you were talking about that are so incredibly hard to motivate. And you see that less and less when you get to units that have more of a selection process. You talk about a SWAT team, you talk about special operations in the military. Those guys want to be there, or they wouldn't have gone through the arduous pipeline it took to get there, right? And unfortunately, I don't know what the answer is apart from hiring practices to make sure that we don't get guys that are just have that assembly line mentality, do no more than I have to keep the boss off my back. I don't know of another answer to that, unfortunately.
I'll be honest with you, Matt. I agree with you, but the reality is I think a lot of folks, it's harder and harder to get the right people into the job. Back in the day, 30 years ago, a military guy was the guy you wanted, right? Because they have discipline, they've been through stress, they kind of understand that. And it's getting harder and harder to get the right mentality, and it's difficult to weed it out. And I think some of that is affecting not just their motive, but it's affecting their ability to make good decisions. They have no life experience. They come out of college with that's fine. It's good. They're educated, but having that life experience is something that helps them get better at it. And that's tough. And yeah, you're right, Lon. Nowadays, I've seen people avoid military folk, and I don't think that's the right idea either. I disagree with that 100%. My nephew was 10th Mountain Division, went through incredible stress in Korengal. He works for Oklahoma City. I'm very proud of him. Obviously, you can't tell, right? Uncle Tom's happy, but he's been a very good officer because he's had life experience, dealt with that kind of stress, made a lot of really good decisions. Matt, I agree with you. It is a recruiting issue, but they're having a hard time getting people in general. I think that's the real detriment to us all.
Before I forget,
for you,
Jacopo, I'm going to queue you up in just a second. But before I forget, somebody remind me if I don't remember to get back to it. Would you prefer a new learner, somebody who is fresh and green, or somebody who has skills that you may have to retrain? So I just want to bring that up with this panel specifically. But I'm going to pass this over to Jacopo.
No, I was just asking Tom which age is for him the best mix of experience and life knowledge for starting the recruitment process and stuff like that. But your question is way more interesting from my point of view. So
it's what I do for a living, man. I take ideas and I make them better.
you've been lucky this time. Yeah. I know.
Hey guys, so Jacopo, believe it or not, they actually say the ideal one where your physical prowess and your cognitive prowess in martial arts is age 40. So granted, many of us are seeing that in the rearview mirror, but putting that aside for a minute, I'd like to sort of, again, guys, I'm the systems guy and reframing guy and all that other kind of stuff. There's some really interesting stuff in the comments here that started off, and you guys are already hitting on it. So the question then was sort of, what happens if we can't change the perspective of the student? Well, that's always the case. That's an external thing. The only thing, back to what Matt talked about with the Stoics, is the only thing we truly have control over is our own perspective, which is our own frame. We can reframe ourselves, and this is basic systems theory or anything else. So one thing I want to sort of throw out to the instructors is, since we have a bunch of instructors in this roundtable, is what happens if we took a step back and reframed our perspective on what it is that we're trying to accomplish? Now, as much as I would love, back to Matt's comment, and again, through SF selection and everything else, I would love to have just the ultimate group of people that want to be there. And Tom mentioned with the, if you're paying for it, you're going to be, it's already a sort of a filter that these guys want to be there. But we know we're not going to have that, and we can't control that, nor will we ever be able to control it probably to the degree we want to. But we can reframe what it is that we're trying to accomplish. Are we trying to train people to be the athletes? Are we trying to train people to be adequate? Are we trying to train people to be that the athletes, that we have enough skill sets to train the athletes to be athletes, and the adequate to not basically harm themselves or harm another? So again, the framing of it is, as an instructor, how often do we step back as a cadre among ourselves and say that it is okay not to bring everybody up to a 10? It's okay to do that. The question is, we bring each person up to a level of competency, a skill set, what they're physically able to do. As we get older, I remember with a combination of firearms tactics and defensive tactics, we modified them for older officers that were in our unit. Doesn't mean they were any less adequate in accomplishing what the skills were supposed to accomplish. We just had to modify them. And so the thing is, as an instructors, can we focus what we are trying to accomplish? Can we reframe so at the end of the day, you guys, everybody sitting here in the round table, can say, today was a good day because I brought everybody a little bit further? So that'd be my question to the group.
Adam, I think we've had this conversation a few times. I hate the term instructor. Instructor almost says, okay, once we get to a specific level, I think that the entire mindset should be that of coach. A coach takes whoever you have in front of you and whatever their performance is for that day and improves it. And we have good days, right? We have bad days. The only absolute about human performance, it varies. But instead of being instructors, we're coaches. And then we're driving their performance better and better that day with their mindset, with the sleep that they've had, with the history of their family, their divorce, whatever it is. We focus on that component. The term instructor, I saw in the comments a couple of times, a red shirt with a Sharpie able to do some basic math skills. That's not an instructor in any way, shape, or form in my book. But I love the version of looking at it as coach or coaching.
And like, to go back to the martial arts aspect, right? The Japanese martial arts have this concept, and it's not just the martial arts over there. It's pretty much everything you do over there, because they have this way of looking at everything as like a path that you're following. And the terms are senpai, kohai. And senpai is just your senior. It's one who's walked the path further than you. If they're not done walking the path, they're not done learning, they're not some font of wisdom that is, makes no errors and is, completely perfect. They're just someone who's gone a few steps further than you, and they can help you walk those few steps and help guide you in your journey. But everybody's journey is their own, and you've got to walk that path yourself.
And there is also a misconception sometimes. Should we be better than our students in performing the drill or whatever? Sometimes I say no. I don't need to be absolutely better. How can I coach a sport athlete if I'm not better than him? That's almost impossible. Otherwise, Olympic champions or world record winner couldn't be coached. So we are never higher than the people that we teach or coach or guide, as you were mentioning before. So that's a very good point.
I brought this up yesterday. This came up in the conversation yesterday. I'm going to bring it up again because we're hitting it on the nail on the head here. My very first instructor course, I was lucky that my instructor was Brian Willis. And Brian said during the course, he said, as an instructor, you're not there to show the student what you can do. You're there to show them what they can do. And that is something that I've carried with me and have tried to strive to achieve every time I teach a course. And I can remember, and of course, now I'm not a firearms instructor, so bear with me with the analogy here. But when I'm teaching a defensive tactics course, I'm not an amazing ground fighter. All my martial arts background is Filipino-based martial arts, stick fighting, stand up, lots of kicking, lots of punching. I can do that fantastically. On the ground, not so good. And I was teaching a course where I had one of the instructors from my jiu-jitsu academy, one of the black belts. He was in the course as a student. And when we got to ground fighting, I basically went to him and I said, hey, listen, is there anything I've missed? Is there anything any tidbits of knowledge that you can share to the rest of the class? Because I understood that I wasn't the best at that skill, but I wanted the students to get more out of it. And so I want to follow up with Jacopo's comment there and pass that off to the rest of the group. Is that something that you guys have tried to instill when you train other instructors?
Yeah, for me, my understanding of this concept actually happened before I was even a cop. I was working as a personal trainer and a strength coach. And as a trainer, right, I'm convincing people to give me $30 an hour to make them sweat, which isn't the easiest thing in the world to do. But we had a lot of bodybuilders that were trainers as well that were absolutely physically gifted and chemically enhanced. But they had no idea really what they were doing. They were having people do contraindicated movements that set them up for injury, set them up for, short-term as well as long-term injuries, overuse injuries. And really quickly, I learned that, who do you learn to run, right? The horse or the horse's trainer? Just because you can perform, you've got the physical gifted skills, it doesn't mean that people can get the most out of you. I saw some of the statements as far as some of the coaching that's out there. There are some phenomenal coaches that were just okay players. You have to know the game. You have to understand the fundamentals, but really you have to understand the psychology of the player themselves. And it goes back to what I said. I think a coach is a better term than instructor. We've seen, some of their statements as guide or whatever. But who do you really want to learn to run? The horse or the horse's trainer?
So, and this is kind of a segue off of what we're talking about now, right? Because we've been talking about, does your skill need to be higher than the skill of your students? And that isn't necessarily so. You can learn a lot from someone, especially someone who struggled to gain their skill, right? Because they may know more about the ins and outs of getting that skill. But I have a question for the panel. Because there's a habit with a lot of law enforcement firearms instructors to not demo. And I think demoing is important, but not in the sense of ego. It's not showing, hey, look, I can do a bill drill in 1.7 or whatever the string of fire is, right? It's when I demo in a class, I want to walk the students through the process I go through physically and mentally when I am practicing that drill, right? So I'll start out with a slow rep that is repeatable, on demand, cold, I can do whenever I want. And then I'll start building up kind of the demand until I find a breaking point, and I make a point of failing in front of the students and talking about how the learning occurs when you fail at the skill, at the drill, and how you make yourself better. Because I think all too often in law enforcement training, the par times are generous enough that once you develop a certain amount of skill, you're no longer pushing yourself and learning is not occurring, like we said earlier. I'd love to hear the panel's thoughts on the purpose of demos and how to conduct demos in firearms training especially.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I'll touch on demos, add a little bit, and then pass on the demo portion. Yeah, demos are critical to a class to show that, I mean, you're establishing your legitimacy to a certain point. Again, it's a careful balance between showing what Matt's talking about, all the ins and outs of what you want your students to accomplish without getting to a point where you're competing with them, because I think that defeats your purpose in the class. But that's also the critical part of it. What Matt mentioned is making sure that you are truly showing those nuances and making sure that it's not just, here, watch me do this, and then you move on. So again, getting that feedback from your students, and remembering that as an instructor, this is just a general comment, but demonstrating the curiosity that you want your students to show you. So going into it and being curious about their performance and what can help them become better. So maybe it's through demos, through talking, through the combination of all those things, and setting the example that we want our students to come back and reflect to us as far as the coaching that we're providing to them. So all those things kind of go hand in hand, and hopefully that jumps off to more conversation about the drills.
Yeah, so it's funny, Alexandra, we just talked about this, didn't we?
Who's talking?
Go.
Tom's talking. Okay, sorry, go ahead, Tom.
Oh, sorry, I thought I had it.
Yeah, we did, Tom.
Okay, so no, I just wrote something about that specific topic only because there was when you went to instructor school, there was one instructor school that was like, you don't ever demo. And they had a whole litany of reasons why you wouldn't do it. One of them was, well, if you miss, you lose your credibility. If you go too fast, they don't see it. There's a whole bunch of things like that. I'll be honest with you, people are visual learners. That's one of the key things you need to key in on. And when you demo, you shouldn't be going 100% anyway, to be honest with you. Because if you are doing a build drill on 1.7 or 1.8 or whatever, then they're not really seeing the technique. So now you may be showing off a little bit. They need to be succinct and to the point. I had one guy who he was working for me. He was an instructor. I don't use him anymore. His point of it was, I don't want to go out there and, just shoot in front of somebody. And I've seen that happen. A guy who was a competition shooter who was at our facility would practice in front of people, and they're watching him practice, but they're not getting the application. So you got to be careful. You do your demos at a speed that they can actually interpret what's happening. And then you got to let them do it. You got to give them a shot at it. The only time you might reiterate something is if in general they're missing it. Not one student, but maybe you didn't explain it well enough and you got to go back. Hopefully you don't. But yeah, I agree with Matt. You go slow, and then you never really get 100% because you want to see the smoothness, the technique of it. And they can't do that if you're doing 1.5 reloads in front of them. I mean, it looks cool, but they're not getting anything out of that. You got to be careful of that.
And everybody here who's an IALEFI member or a new IALEFI member, Tom, you just wrote an article for IALEFI on the importance of demos, I believe. So people can go and check that out. Bill, I know you wanted to jump in here.
Right. We've done the only study, and we thought it's really important to do this to measure the effectiveness of academy skills. And it doesn't matter what area it's in, because all the areas are taught in the same format. We think that just because we've measured physical skills, we think we also have some application of psychological skills such as communication, de-escalation, crisis intervention, etc. But we made 10,000 videos of skill acquisition and perishability in 3 major state academies. And we found the instructors were enthusiastic, cared for the students, really wanted them to do well. But when we measured how they were demonstrating what they were teaching, they didn't know how to demonstrate very well. If they were teaching a particular motor skill, like for instance, an impact strike, they would not know the critical components, which may appear to be in the arm, but really are in the thighs and the hips as you generate that force. And then it's time on target. They would do something, but they wouldn't know how to demonstrate the critical steps in the skill that were really important for the student to know. And what that translated into is they didn't know how to correct the critical steps on the student. And every instructor we ran into was qualified in their area, but they didn't know how human beings learned a skill. And they didn't learn how to motivate or how to encourage people. So I think there's some lessons there. They also didn't know how to make their skill more variable. So they would have a short person and a skinny person matched with a short and skinny person because they didn't really know how to take the techniques they were teaching and have them apply on different populations. So my hope is that only short, skinny people would have to apply whatever technique they were learning on other short, skinny people. So, but I think there's some lessons there about the role of demonstrating, because we call it modeling. How you model, it's not just that you model the skill, but you model the critical points in the skill that make that skill work for you and for the student. And I think being able to break that down, as I saw, and I won't say it again, but I was watching a video last night, and that's exactly what was being talked about. It's how you break that skill down so the critical steps are required by the student. They see, and then they try, and they learn how to improve their own skill as they're learning it. But I want to get to one other point, and one of the most amazing academies that we have run across is, ironically, in Pierre, South Dakota. And I know we're talking about students and their inability to communicate and the lack of enthusiasm and knowledge and commitment to learning. And what they've done in Pierre is take the students, and within 2 weeks, the students are in small groups, working around a table, working together as a team. They are journaling about how they're working together as a team. They're doing amazing stuff using work groups to build social and emotional intelligence. But what they're finding is that the work groups support tremendous peer growth. So they work together to build the skills of each other because they're being measured and they're supporting each other as a group. And they're using the power of other students to help influencing the learning process. And I really think we should do something like that. The work group, the small work group that's committed to helping each other learn and improve, is a great way to motivate students. It's a great way to apply social pressure. It's a great way to build what we're missing in today's students, social and emotional intelligence. And it turns out to be a great way to build skills. Some of the stuff they have got in the building of skills with some of the populations that had never been able to be assertive or to successfully apply physical techniques. They're now transforming that population by means of work groups. And they wish they had more time, and they wish they had more dollars, and they could do amazing things with what they're doing if they had that. But they don't. So they're doing the best they can. Thank you, Lou.
Real quickly, everybody watching this, you'll see the live chat that's happening. We also have a chat just for the panelists. And John brought up a point about how demos create empathy with the learners. So John, I'd like you to touch on that for a second, if you could.
Yeah, been brought out by a lot of systems research, and one specifically that comes to mind is Cabrera, is they break down complexity in this idea of distinctions, systems, relationships, and parts. But the parts actually is the P in here stands for perspective. So now let's translate that. One of the, Yeah, it's kind of fuzzy concept. One of the things about this is if I look at something as X because my life experience and everything else, and someone over here looks at it and they see it, the question is, how can I bridge the perspectives? Neither perspective should be judged. A perspective is simply perspective. It's sort of like an emotion. An emotion isn't necessarily judged. Being angry isn't right or wrong. You are. A perspective is something you have. But what I can do is I have conversations about that. So one of the first things we have, and this comes from like what Scott Savage was talking about with the idea of being a negotiator, is we build empathy, we build relationships, because what that does is shows respect, shows trust, shows a bunch of other things. So now I'm giving a demo. Well, what does giving a demo do for me? Well, it does a lot of things, actually. Back to Matt's point, if I fail during the demo, I show that failure is not the end state. All of our stuff doesn't show up as exactly as it should be. That's okay. And now I'm more like the tribe, and we're going to call this tribe the tribe of students, because the students look at the tribe of instructors in the range as a different tribe, right? And so, you know, seniority and all this other kind of stuff. And then you have the tribe. This speaks back to Dan's point earlier, and even Tom's, the so-called the old crusty six, as we used to call them in Washington County, where they were there just to get their cert done. Well, there's all these little cliques, and we'll just use the word tribes about that. Putting yourself out there, doing a demo, and not doing a demo from a point of ego, but doing a demo where you're being vulnerable. And being vulnerable, you're showing the students, is there someone there that's a competitive shooter that will shoot faster than you? Yes. And you know what? You're okay with that. You don't get defensive. You don't get anything else. And now the very act of the demo allows you to say, hey, you guys are you, the student, that's making this delineation of us versus them, instructor versus student. And sometimes arguably we would do the same. You know, think about yourself sitting in the range house and you're different from them. Now all of a sudden those lines can blur. And if we are part of the same tribe trying to accomplish the same thing, all of a sudden things get better, because now empathy is established, and with empathy we can have play, learning, and there's a bunch of other stuff under basic systems theory. So my 2 cents.
I just also want to point out that the whole reason this roundtable concept exists in the way we teach it, and when we put the podcast together, goes back to conversations that Lon and I had almost a year ago, if not more. Letting the learner inside of kind of behind the curtain as to what you're doing. And so when we run the roundtables for the podcast specifically, usually we have the instructors on the roundtable and all of the attendees are general officers. And it's the idea of that we want to show them, how do we come up with training concepts? Why do we do things the way that we do them? What are we thinking about in terms of developing other training programs? All of those things are so important to build the context for the learner so that they can actually buy in, which is something we've been talking about this entire time, is how do you get them to buy in? You buy in by like letting them in, showing them the recipe. This is why we're doing it. We're not trying to say that this is my secret and I'm only going to teach you what certain things and I'm keeping the rest to myself. As instructors, we want to share as much as we possibly can. And I think that's something that's hard to get across to people sometimes. When you were talking about the 2 different tribes. And I just wanted to point that out there, because that was something that really hit home for me when you said that.
And something I'd like to kind of bring around full circle on this, if I could, is, and this is not always possible in like a basic firearms environment, right? It's not. But when you can, when it's more advanced training, when you have more time with the students, or like in the classes that I teach for my company, like the demo process for me, it's not just about showing the physical mechanics. I really want to let them in on my thought process when I practice. And I'll tell them right off the bat that they will see me fail, because I'll show them what I can do comfortably under control. And then I'll show them what it takes to get better. And that involves failure. And I think far too often in institutional environments, either military or law enforcement, we tend to have this aversion to failure in training. But if you don't allow yourself the freedom to fail, you're not going to get beyond a certain skill level ever, because it takes failure to learn.
Actually, I know we've been talking about ego, and one of the, at least in our conversations online, and one of the psychological theories that I adhere to is Adlerian psychology of Alfred Adler. And one of the main themes of Adlerian psychology is it's the opposite of fear of failure. It's having the courage to be imperfect, to risk, because it's only through learning what our mistakes are and how we can change them that we really learn. That's how we really improve. If we're protecting what we have and never exposing what it is that we haven't learned, we're not good students and we're not good models for our students. We're asking them to have the courage to be imperfect, to risk, to try, and then to learn from that. And we don't model it ourselves. I think it's really important.
There were a couple comments and questions here in the chat, and I want to make sure to get to these because I thought they were really good. The first one came from Corbin, and he said, I'd love to hear discussion on realistic qualification standards and departments who have more to that model. Realistic qualification standards is interesting concept. So I'll pass it off to you guys to see what your thoughts on it are.
So guys, I'm just going to chime in and then I'm going to step out, but I want to add sort of a caveat to tie two conversations together. And this is building on Dr. Lewinski's comment. If we view failure not as a negative, if we view failure as the point, because if we scored 100%, it means that we're not challenging ourselves, right? If the student scores 100%, it means that they aren't going past their level of comfort. And our goal within training is to bring them into those areas that they're more likely than not uncomfortable. So that being said, let's take the same question, which I agree that Corbin has, I think it's a great frame of a question, is how could we take a look at qualification standards where the concept of, and we're going to call this term failure right now, but that even has to be played with, where the concept of failure is not necessarily viewed as a negative outcome. So that's my question to the group.
You know, I think that sometimes we miss an opportunity to correlate physical body and the cognitive mind and how it wraps into itself. If we think about working out, if we want to get stronger, we do what? We push to a point of failure, and we accept that, right? If I want my bench to get better, I want to start pushing to a point where I'm getting really close, if not to that point of failure, and we accept that wholeheartedly. You know, I'm going to try to get 12 reps in, but I may only get 10. And I think if we can equate that, the training, the physical component to the training of the skill set, I think it might be a way to get people to overcome that whole concept of fear of failure.
So Lon, to echo in on what you just said, we could almost make it that if they don't fail, and this is like a thing from DARPA, from the Army, where at least it's anywhere from 70 to 80% of the experiments have to fail, is in fact, if they don't at least achieve at least one failure, they haven't trained that day. Now, wouldn't that be an interesting metric?
Absolutely, John. For me, it is. How can I get out of a class not having failed any of the drill or the exercise? Am I a better student after the class? Or have I been pushed enough? But also discussing a little bit more about the failure thing. I think as an instructor demoing or in the class teaching, we absolutely need to acknowledge failure for ourselves. We can make mistakes, and we are allowed to make mistakes as instructors. And when the students sees us, sorry guys, it's late, sees us doing mistakes, they know that learning is a process. Learning is doing a path of mistakes and learning from the mistakes itself. And I was discussing this with Sasha and Paolo during the class that we are actually recorded for IALEFI, so the one that is supposed to be airing today and tomorrow. But the point is, we were discussing failure as the objective of the exercise, considering the objective of the exercise. I'm explaining it a little bit better now. Is hitting the target the real goal of my exercise? Is hitting the center spot of the silhouette of the target the real goal of all the exercise that we put our students through? I don't think so. I think that the process of getting into that point is the real goal of any exercise. The movement, the weapon presentation, the decision-making process to use that weapon instead of the other, of hitting the target, engaging it instead of not engaging it. So there is a lot more into an exercise than just hitting the target into the right spot. So what is failure? As an instructor or as a student, if I do not hit the damn spot, am I failing the exercises or not? So we are walking down a very thin line here of really considering what is good and what is not from the learning curve perspective. I don't know if you agree with that.
No, and Jacopo, that to me makes perfect sense. And I've been following obviously your comments and with Sasha's as well. So let me throw something out again. I'm the reframing type of guy. Imagine if you would, and this is to the group of all instructors on here, and James, you bring up a very good point with failure needs to occur to grow, but we also have to be careful about their confidence, right? That's the nuance of that. But let's remove the idea of failure. And let's just say, for example, the goal or the metric is learning. Now back to Scott's earlier point, how do you measure learning? Well, okay, we can work on that. And there's lots of empirical evidence and quantitative methodology and everything else that can show learning, or even qualitative. But if we know as an instructor that if we focus our goal not on, now I'm going to put a caveat in here. The caveat is, I get it. We have to get qualifications. We have the minimum standards. We have certifications. We have certain liabilities. We have risk management. I understand that. I'm not saying that they have to exist exclusively. But what I'm getting at is we can exist in tandem, in that we can work on the students in imparting to them that today is a good day on the range. Today is a good day when you go home and, as Matt puts on, you grab your fidget gun. Today is a good day when you have focused on learning. You've immersed yourself, you've lived in it, you've done everything else. And back to Dan's earlier comments, well, I don't got time to do that or anything else, and I'm not a freaking pro athlete or anything else. Well, maybe today for you is a good day when you're a little bit closer, and there's been a lot of comments in here about off duty. Maybe today is a little bit better because you're closer in surviving an off-duty encounter because you took 5 minutes. In other words, the goal or the metric now becomes continuous improvement or continual improvement, and the learning becomes the metric, and we eliminate the word failure, because learning can be not achieving the, back to Jacopo's point, the center mass shot, or learning can also be something else. And I see Vaughn's on here now, who's an excellent man in these kind of stuff. And I would agree with you. Enough stress to build calluses, but not enough to build blisters. But the same thing is, and this actually comes from good to great type of work and some of the other type of stuff. But they went to West Point, and they examined all stuff at West Point. One of the things that they found at West Point, which was odd to the researchers, was that the culture of West Point was designed to learn to accept failure. Failure was not viewed as a negative, and they don't even use the word failure. There's no need to. Failure was just simply another chance to learn something. And if you take it back, as it's been recognized by instructors in the comments, we learn more by our inability to achieve something than we do by the so-called constantly achieving something. We have to get out of our comfort zone. So back to Jacobo's point and wrapping this up is I would almost find a way from a metric and back to Courtman's original question is, could we design a qualification course that both met the minimum certification standards and in getting to that, remove the concept of failure? So I'm very curious from the rest of the panel on what they have to say about that.
I just real quickly, I'm gonna Matt, you're up. I'm gonna cue you up. I just want to point out for those of you who are on here right now, I'm not gonna. I don't want to fluff your tires, John. But you guys don't understand that John's recall when he's pulling all this stuff out, that's actually in his head. He's actually recalling this information. It's one of the most fascinating things. I can't remember how many conversations I've had with him where his recall is just. He pulls stuff out of thin air. So if you don't know him already,
there's another adjective you can use other than thin air, but yeah, okay, we'll go with that.
Fair enough. I just wanted to point that out because some people are probably thinking like, oh, he has a lot of notes. It's not notes. Like I just wanted to throw that out there. Anyway, Matt, I'm going to let you go.
So, couple things here, right, that I was thinking about. One is that, and I shoot a lot in training myself, but I really try hard to make sure that every bullet I fire is a lesson, that I learn something from every single repetition on everything. Because if you don't, it's empty practice again, like we talked about earlier, right? Like you've got to make sure that it's mindful practice, it's deliberate practice. You're learning from every single repetition you take. And as far as the qualification course, here's my thoughts on this. I really dislike most qualification courses, either military or police, because basically what happens is you have this standard that's meant to be a minimum standard across the board. And once you can meet that standard, you have no metric to know if you've improved or not. Once you're faster than the part-time and you're hitting in the minimum, the optimal scoring area, right? Whatever the maximum scoring zone is, once you're doing both of those things, you don't know if you're getting better, if you're stagnant, if you're getting worse. And there's no steady state in nature. There's no stasis. You're either working on improving or you're degrading. I would love to see a qualification course that has a minimum standard, but no maximum. In other words, you get points for shooting it faster with the same amount of accuracy, so that there's always room for improvement. More like competitions are scored in USPSA, where, yeah, we might have the same hits, but if you're a quarter second faster than me, you have a better score as long as our accuracy is the same. So that would be my ideal qualification in a perfect world, not something you can max out and then maintain for the rest of your career, something where there is no top score, where there's a minimum acceptable standard to satisfy liability for the agency. But beyond that, there is always room to improve, to grow, to strive, to get better.
So it's a little funny. When I have skill sets that we do in our courses, and I have a set time that they have to do something in, whatever that task is. And generally speaking, understand that, and we all kind of know this, that a qualification is not training. It's a measurement of what they've attained, right? And so what I do in each course is different. There's different qualifications because I've got different things that I'm trying to give. And it motivates them to want to learn it. Hey, this is what you've got to achieve. So, but I have two sets of times. I have a time that this is the time that you need to achieve to, accomplish whatever task I'm giving you. And then I call it a pro time. So if you can get to this time, then you're really kicking butt. I mean, you really nailed it right there. And it's kind of cool to have in the same course of fire, two different standards, and you can kind of tell them, to motivate them to try and move more efficiently, to not have, well, I got 10 seconds to do it, so I'm going to take my time with it. Hey, if you guys get it in 5, that's a pro time. So that's an interesting way of looking at it. But I think, the minimum, like as post standard, we did more than that. Our times were faster and everything else, and people had to train more because of that. But there's the problem with it is that you run that rub of maybe having them fail the qual, and now you're in the remedial training. So you got to be careful how far you go or where you set that bar. I get it, but it's an interesting way of approaching this, you're ninja, right? Well, not ninja, but you know what I mean.
Tom, a very quick question for you, or a consideration for you, because I know you are an experienced instructor. As an instructor, do we really need to see numbers or points to understand if the person, the students behind us, in front of us, I mean, is good to go around the street or not?
So
or you can evaluate the minute he's downrange.
So you have to have some kind of standard that they need to try and achieve to motivate them. Like I do it in the to war classes for civilians. I have a course of fire. I don't spend my life on that course of fire. I don't make them shoot it over and over again. It's just to let them know, hey, you're going to do this. And what it's doing is it's creating that stress. They're not used to doing qual, so it creates a stress. But it's also forcing them, they pay a little bit more attention when they know that there's an end state. So if I've got a limited amount of time, I got 2 days, 3 days, 4 days, whatever, hey, we need to get to this point. We have to do this. And this is the goal we need to have. So, you know, we were talking earlier about students that aren't motivated to be there. Well, when they know they have that, they've got to get through to that point, then, you know, they try to drive a little harder to learn the mechanics, to pay attention, to push the envelope and to reach that failing point, to kind of know where they are because they know that's coming. But again, that's just a tool to motivate them in one setting. In another one, you kind of have to have that because at the end of the day, there's this standard, there's a legal reason, you know, that they were allowed to carry that gun, that they had certain skill sets that said, yeah, you're good to go. Kind of like taking a driving test, right? Or whatever, but you can't escape it.
So what
you can make it
so what
harder.
What you do if they make the cut, but you don't trust them? Because a lot of the instructors listening to us today may have found themselves in the same situation here.
Yeah, we have. So I had a guy who qualified, absolutely qualified during the academy. And week 9, we did it in the middle. We had 17 weeks. We did it in the middle of the academy, the firearms week. His weapons handling was not great, disciplined. We had all kinds of issues with him. Nice guy, doesn't matter. He ended up getting washed out on his decision making. They usually find I recommended no. Didn't matter if he met the minimum standard in qualification. There's a different motivation in law enforcement though. So I don't know how it works in every state, but in Arizona, if they pass the academy, the money that the department put into training them gets reimbursed. If they fail, the department's out that money. It used to work that way back in the day. So I would love to say, yep, you know what, you're out, you need to go. But there's another motivation in the background, and that's not the way to do it, in my opinion. And it has to do with that vetting process that Matt was talking about, you know, getting the wrong guy, and you can see that come out. So yeah, it's difficult to try and weed that guy out when you have that kind of motivation, that monetary motivation.
And maybe here is the time when some empathy comes into play. Like, listen, I know you made your requirements, you made the cut, but as an instructor, I see some weak point that you really need to work on to be safe, which is telling them basically that you're asking them to work a little bit more, not because you are a training junkie, but just because you feel that they're going to be safer at the end of the day.
Yeah.
If
and
they
you do
listen
tell
to
them.
your, and you do tell them. So that's,
absolutely. I do it gently off to the side. Hey, you know, on the range, not yelling at them like we were talking about earlier. Hey, listen,
no,
you
of course.
stop doing that. You got to adjust, and here's why. You got to adjust, and here's why. But after a while, they're not getting the message, and if their brain turns off, which it can't, you know, not in firearms, they got to be switched on. Then you have to start hitting a little hard. In this case, we did a continuum of force with a student was executed. You know, we started low and gradually it became down to, you do this again, you're going to seek punishment or whatever. I'm going to suggest that you be removed. You got to think about it for yourself. So we did do that. We try to motivate that the best way we can. I think I have my daughter next to me.
That's fine.
Hey, this is my daughter. How you guys doing?
Hi, daughter. Thanks
mute
for
for a second.
answering me the question. I know that we share the same concept, but
Yes.
I was looking for some food for thoughts for our fellow instructor listening to the conversation. I mean, like John is writing on the chat, is because we care. Yes, we care about the students. That's why we choose this job and this mission of teaching people and making them safer. So why not to tell them that they need a little bit more of an effort for being really, really safe out there, which is the objective of training.
Bill's asking for the mic.
I want to reframe this discussion, if I might, in two areas. First is I did my doctoral residency. I didn't need one, but I took one anyway with Kevin Gilmartin. And I heard Gilmartin one day talking about basic academies. And he was talking about training the warrior or the warrior garden or whatever. And the concept was that everybody in that academy had to be a warrior guardian or whatever it was that we were striving for. And he said, you know, out of that academy class, we need people who are going to sit all day in front of a computer looking at child porn. And we're going to have somebody that's going to be a bomb tech and is going to walk into a store and see a new processor and get really excited. And out of that academy, we need someone that wants to be the first person through, knocking down that door on a raid. And how do we take all of those people to a base standard? Because what we're arguing about is really that base standard, as Little was talking about. What we need to do is look at the upper levels and whether or not what we're doing is really helping officers prepare for what they need to do or might need to do. So on one end is this base standard. On the other end is, well, we could look at, for instance, martial arts skills. We could look at full contact fighters. Except even that, if an officer is there, they're not prepared necessarily for what they need to do, because the person the officer will be meeting is unknown. The environment is likely unknown. It may be low light. There's no rules. There's no referee. Oh, there are rules on the officer, not on the other person. And one of the things I learned growing up in a very violent neighborhood in Canada was you have to be very careful about the person who doesn't know when to quit, because that person will destroy you, regardless of how skillful you are. Their insanity and their intensity is something. Yeah, we talk about de-escalation and there are people we can't make contact with. Got it. But that's the kind of person officers sometimes run into. And the problem is all of our, I'm going to use some science here, and Lon has heard me talk about this. It's his bailiwick. We practice firearm skills as a closed skill, meaning you're not doing much movement. You're learning how to manage recoil, how to put a bullet down range. And it's in a closed environment, meaning the target doesn't move, doesn't talk back to you, doesn't shoot at you. But that skill will have to be used as an open skill, meaning you're moving, you're shooting, you're trying to acquire a target, you're shooting to save your life, you're emotionally really at a high level, and your opponent is doing everything they can to destroy you. And that is a really very different environment. And so what is it we're looking for? Because right now, all we are able to do is to check the box that somebody can manage a tool under a controlled environment and use that tool to some degree of minimal proficiency. And it's that way across all our skill sets. When we tested academy training with firearms, we found that at the end of the FTO program, the officer who had finished all of their training, their firearms training, taught in a block and silo, was at common gunfight distances 10% better than someone who never had a gun in their hand in their life. We're not doing the officer justice in their training. That's a peer-reviewed study. That's in a scientific journal. And in another journal, we looked at empty hand control, arrest and control techniques. And most of those need a critical step. Like if you're doing weapon takeaway, you got to at least touch a weapon or touch the arm, or it doesn't work. And only 29% of those officers were able to do that critical step 6 months after graduating from the academy. 29%, even on impact strikes. I mean, what is simpler than using an impact tool? And only 29% were able to have the skills to make that technique work 6 months after graduation from the academy. What are we doing? We need a big revision in this profession.
I think it's cultural, right? Like this is the thing that I think is key, that a lot of the supervisory levels in law enforcement don't understand, is that the culture of a team or an institution is the single most important factor, I think, in the competence level of its members. And you can build culture on a very low budget. It doesn't take a lot of money. It just takes the right way of doing things. To go back to, my previous life, John's previous life, right, in SF, what makes SF what it is not that the people in it are superhuman, because they're not. It's the culture. Overwhelmingly, almost everyone in the SF regiment would rather die than embarrass the regiment, because that's how much it matters to them, right? So that gives you that level of superhuman performance. It's not because they're such gifted people, they're not superheroes, right? But they're willing to do what needs to be done to achieve a level of competence, and they're willing to accomplish the mission and not let down their teammates no matter what. And we have to build that kind of a culture in our law enforcement agencies. And this isn't about warrior versus protector or about levels of conflict or anything like that. It's about dedication to the craft and mastering the craft and being good at what you do. And that's a cultural thing. You have to build that from the ground up in your agency to get that kind of result, I think.
Adam,
Go ahead.
yeah, I was just going to say that kind of goes back to the concept of the allowing people to fail, and how our, even culturally as police departments, that just hasn't been a part of how we do business, right? You can't fail. You have to go out and you have to tell people what to do and make sure that they are on board with what you instruct them to do and all this kind of stuff. And if it doesn't come down from the top that all of these different things are supported, I don't think we're going to get, it's always going to be that uphill battle, right? It's always going to be something where we feel like we're alone on that island. We're alone on our coaching island trying to preach to people who don't want to hear us. So and I think it's up to all of us to be subtly changing that culture, or overall changing that culture, but at least subtly doing it day by day as we get new people promoted and we get people into this mindset that we need to be sharing and learning from failure and just all these things that we talked about tonight.
So real quickly, thank you everybody for that. I mean, we're going to continue this conversation, but I know a few of you, I know Matt and I know Alexandra has to work in the morning. Matt has to take off. I want to give you guys each a second to just say your goodbyes and where people can get a hold of you if they would like to. So Matt, I'll let you go first.
All right. I'm on the internet at graybeardactual.com, or you can reach me if you want to talk to me about the staccatos and the 2011 pistols, the duty pistols. Matt.little@staccato2011.com is my email for that. I'm on Instagram as graybeard_actual also. I've got open enrollment and LE only classes scheduled for the rest of the year. And if you need to arrange a T&E or a demo or a training class for the 2011 duty pistols, just get a hold of me and I can arrange that for you as well. This has been a great conversation. I feel really honored to be on this panel. There's a lot of wisdom and insight here. And I wish we could continue the conversation for hours, but unfortunately I have to take off. So thanks everyone. I've really enjoyed it, and have a good night.
Appreciate it, brother. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Alexandra.
You can find me through IALEFI at Alexandra Nelson at IALEFI.com. I'm part of your executive board now as of this year, and happy to answer any questions you might have, any concerns about IALEFI. It's a great organization, and we hope to keep growing. I also run a side business doing firearms training, so that's Phoenix at firearmstrainingltd.com if you're interested in any of that or want to have a conversation outside of IALEFI. And to echo what Matt said, I'm honored to be a part of this panel. Thanks, Adam, for inviting me. And it was a fantastic conversation. And I'm sorry I can't stay later, but 4 o'clock in the morning comes really early. So I got to get some sleep.
I just want to point out,
It's 4 o'clock here.
it is 4 o'clock for Jacopo.
It's actually 4 o'clock in the morning, yes.
So,
Jacopo, it's all about changing perspective. You stay up another hour and a half, you get to see the sunset, man.
Yeah, that was the goal, but you are quitting, so I'm just,
it's a beautiful sunset.
All right, I'll see you later. Stay
All right,
safe.
good night, everyone.
Nope, there we go. All right. Is anybody else to take off real quickly? Otherwise, we're going to go into an overtime segment, which we've never done before on the Instructors Roundtable. First time only here.
No, I'll go, so I'll do my goodbyes. And thank you for hosting me here today. I feel I'm really humbled to be all around these gentlemen here that are very, very special guys. And you can find us at tactpoltactics.com, which is our website. All the references are there. I know that Adam was referring to some technical issues today with our pre-recorded class. So if you miss it or if you have some bad experience with the audio, please go back into the class. It's working now. So we really need to know your feedback on it. So of course, it's all about the feedback on the community. So thank you for having us. It was a pleasure. It was very funny and very, very knowledgeable. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Jacopo. Stay safe, brother.
Bye.
And real quick before Lou, this is to Lou Hamlin before you log off. I lost track of the amount of birds I stepped out of courtesy of the 160th SOAR. Amazing folks, amazing people. So honored with your relationships with them. So thank you, sir.
Awesome. I was going to cue this up because I had this. I just downloaded it because I think it's funny. I just got to bring this up there. Overtime. Never happened before in a roundtable, but we're doing it. For those of you not familiar, so this group right here, just so that you guys are tracking on this, Bill, Lon, and John, this is kind of like my brain trust. You can throw Chris Butler in this mix as well, of my go-to when it comes to law enforcement training. These are the guys that I go to and reach out to almost every day. I blow their phones up more than I probably should, so I'll apologize for that right now, but I'm going to continue to do it. With everything that we've talked about so far today, when we talk about instructor and training development, is there anything that we've left off the table that you guys think is important to bring up?
So I'll weigh in, not initially, but I want to bring sort of a tie-in with the idea, and I'll just put it as a single word, which is the idea of perspective and its value. And I'll tack that back to complexity and some of the other stuff that I researched with. I know I'm working with Dr. Lewinski on some of this stuff, and Lon is just actually an amazing researcher in it as well as a practitioner. So I just want to, before we get to the end of it, just to bring that up.
I'll pay you later for the advertisement.
I've got an elephant that's being transmitted from Thailand, but of course we're going to go back to the elephant. You realize this is never going to leave us, right? It's the elephant.
I'm completely okay with it.
Yeah.
You know, I'm so fortunate I get to stand on the shoulder of, you know, both of the gentlemen here on the panel. And I think that's an important consideration, you know, when you talk to instructor and development. You know, look for those people that have done some phenomenal work, and what drives them, what their passion is, and see what you can do to then build off of some of their aspects and some of their work. you know, and then obviously pay the respects that are due. I've been blessed to, you know, work with Dr. Lewinski and be mentored by unbelievable individuals in the industry. Craig Stapp was my mentor, actually pulling triggers. You know, the stuff that I did with when I was dealing with explosives, some of the guys that were DoD that taught me a ton about, you know, really how to make explosives work for me. I was lucky, and, you know, just building off of that and then making sure that you pass it on, kind of like that mentor protege, not just an instructor, but find a protege and develop them. And that means time, resources, and effort. But I think that's what we really owe our own profession to continue forward.
I concur, Lon. I think the people we get to work with are really amazing. And I'm very fortunate to work with you and also Craig Stapp. Learned a lot from Craig Stapp. And John's an amazing decision maker, or training on decision making. Don't know about his decision making per se, but he's really great at training and research. I have a hint he's kind of great at decision making too. But it's really true. The sharing the passion with somebody, that kind of teamwork, that work groups that we generate either ourselves or we're put into, are really critical in helping us move forward. And it's great to be working with the guys on the panel, and Adam is as well.
Well, thank you. I don't deserve to be in the same conversation as the three of you, but I will take it, and I will leverage it into something that I can probably sell later. For everybody here who's still on the live show, there's 37 of you. That's amazing. You've been on here for over 3 hours. Kudos to you. I mean, it's a real testament to who you are as an instructor, the fact that you're still here, you're still learning. And I wanted to bring this up earlier, but you can, for instance, Bill was talking about how yesterday he was listening to podcasts, continually taking in knowledge. And that's a conversation that all of us have had. I know all of us here on the panel have significant martial arts backgrounds. And I know Lon and I talk about this all the time, that once the master stops learning, they stop being the master. That is a concept that, I mean, is ingrained in all of us from a martial arts background. But really for an instructors, I think that has to be such a key component to when we build instructor programs. I think the first thing you do when you sit down in an instructor training course, you have to say, all right, I'm going to tell you the realities of what being an instructor, being a coach, being a guide is. And it's not just getting through this course, getting your name on a certificate and saying you're an instructor now, because that's the beginning of your journey, right? We say in martial arts, when you get your black belt, that's the beginning of your journey. And I really think that there are certain components of what we do in martial arts that are so transferable to skills as instructors and coaches that we should really be bringing that more to the forefront when we run these instructor training programs.
So, Adam, I'm going to piggyback onto what you just said. And first of all, I agree 100%. And the other thing too is you're being modest. So, and I'll explain that to you. The idea here is that the conversation, what we're having now, is important. I want everybody that still is remaining on to sort of think about this for a minute. And this is actually, this is theoretical work. It's also empirical work that's done out of things like the rightquestion.org and everything else. If you notice, you got to sort of the nuggets after you got a while into the conversation. And that's the nature of learning, especially what they call liminal learning or obliquity, where you go sort of 15 degrees off center, where you bring in other stuff. There's a bunch of frameworks that deal with everything else. But the idea is you notice some of the really cool stuff comes out simply because you had the conversation. And Adam, to your point, you created the conversation. Without the conversation and without the duration of the conversation, we wouldn't get to the points that we are. So one of the things I want to offer the group that's still on here that has sort of come out as a thought is I want to offer you the concept of question storming versus brainstorming. I'm not a big believer in brainstorming when it comes to learning. Brainstorming usually goes something like this. There's no such thing as a bad solution. That's, first of all, false. How many times have you rolled your eyes when a bad solution gets put up on the board? And then once the solution gets up there, we defend the solution and we get into cliques and camps and we stop thinking and we start defending. Question storming is about figure out what you're trying to solve and ask a bunch of questions about it. And you notice we don't get defensive about our questions. So back to the instructors that are still on here. How could we do this better? How could we get to a better outcome? How could we motivate people? Back to Dan's earlier comment. How could we do this stuff? And just live with it and ask the next question. I used to hold meetings. I built an intel group because one of my prior military specialties was intelligence. And I told the guys, the first person that comes up with a solution, I will kick out of this meeting. It was like I tied their hands. It was brutal to watch the process because everybody has been trained to only live in uncertainty, the uncomfortable place, to the bare minimum to get to the decision, which we will be rewarded for. And we do that as instructors. What are you going to do here? What are you going to do here? What are you going to do now? The bare amount of information to get the decision. We're taught that staying in the information area without coming to a decision is failure. So one thing I would offer the group that remains on here is play with the idea of question storming. You can type it into Google, writequestion.org. The other thing I would play with is the concept of perspective. And I'll give you an example from my area here. I live in Central Oregon, Portland, the great home that it is. There's multiple people there with different belief systems. Very few people come into their belief system thinking that it is wrong. So if something that's opposing you, they believe they're right and you believe they're right, maybe the better question is, how can you both be believing you're right? Now let's take this down to a firearms instructor. The student believes X. I'm doing everything correct. I'm doing everything you showed me. And you're telling him, no, you're not. You have your perspective of what's going on. They have their perspective. Those perspectives are not necessarily in collision. Both of you are stating truths by your own perspective. The question is, as an instructor, how can you understand his truth and how can you help him understand yours? And so again, I would offer this to the guys that have hung out here for the longest time. But these are things that empirical research, systems theory, complexity, wicked problem theory, all these other type of stuff can offer you as a side discipline all the way down to the most granular level. So I thank everybody. It has truly been an honor to talk with you guys. And the short answer is I'm here for you guys. If you guys have any questions, my phone stays open 24/7. You can just call me and I will help you out.
One thing I want to do, go ahead, Bill, you got something?
Sorry, I said I'll attest to John. He's a great guy and he's always got answers that are very helpful. And he cares.
Absolutely. One thing I want to do for everybody who's still on here, I want to ask another, I have some stuff to, you know what? I want to give some stuff away for people that are still here. When we ran the International Law Enforcement Training Summit, one of the things we did was we collaborated with an organization called Copline. Now Copline is a resource. It's a phone line for law enforcement officers, only for law enforcement officers, for if you're in the middle of a mental health crisis or emergency, you don't know where else to turn to, they're a great phone call for you. Oh, Jesus, here we go. Hang on a second. I'm going to cut these clowns off. So we're talking about mental health here, boys. So what we did was we partnered with Copline and we came up with this program, and I Got Your Six. Now that's for anybody who served in the forces. You're very familiar with the terminology. We've had these patches made up. What I'd like to do is, for everybody who's still here, I'm going to come up with a skill testing question. I'm going to ask the three guys again about a skill testing question. But we have the Instructors Roundtable shirts. We have a bunch of knives from our friends over at LA Police Gear. And so what I'll do is for 5 people that answer the question, I'm going to send you a shirt, a patch, and a knife as a thank you for being on here with us. So does anybody have a question about instructor training or development for anybody who's still on here to answer? And Bill mutes his mic.
I'm waiting for Lon. He's a man.
The question. What was it? You asked? You brought one up in the private chat earlier.
I did. It was have somebody explain Hebb's law or Hebbian theory.
Jesus. Okay. Well, I don't even know the answer to that one. So, do you know? Let's use that. And I don't care if you Google it or what you do. Hebbian theory, Hebb's law. If you have the answer to that, put it in the chat. The first 5 people that have the answer to that question are going to get some swag. So I appreciate it. And the reason being is, listen, guys, I really appreciate everybody taking the time and being on here and just contributing to your own learning. And the reason why I collaborate with these 3 fellows all the time is because every single one of us is so passionate about having instructors just think outside the box and continually educate themselves. That is something that it's a passion of mine. I know it's a passion of all 3 guys here on the panel, and everybody and all the panelists who were here earlier. And so I want to reward that. And I can't do a lot, but I can give away some swag because I got a bunch of it here. So I want to be able to do that. So first 5 people that answer that question, whether you've Googled it or not, I don't care. We'll get this free swag.
Aaron's got it.
Definitely Google. Aaron, what I want to know is in the chat, did you Google that or did you actually know it? Be honest. It's okay. All right. With all that being said and everything we've talked about as these definitions come in, we've talked a lot about a lot of different concepts here, like a lot of concepts. Is there anything that came up that you guys thought is a controversial concept when it comes to instructor development? Like something that comes up in training where usually instructors will have a lot of varying opinions on how it should be done. Whether it's qualifications and standards, whether it's the way that we actually conduct range training, anything that comes to top of mind for you guys.
Go ahead, Sensei.
Yeah, one of the things that jumps to my mind is the concept that practice makes perfect. And as we were speaking earlier, it's mindfulness that's really important. It is not rote practice or mindless practice. The other is that a fair amount of research tells us that practice in and of itself doesn't make perfect. It is figuring out how to solve a problem. And we guide practice, and with guided practice, we think we're doing a lot of learning. And the real problem comes when we take that guided practice and apply it in real world. It's nowhere near as effective as what we were speaking about earlier. Individuals who try to solve a problem and try to reach a goal really kind of acquire a skill in a very different way than individuals who are guided step by step through something. The step-by-step guidance works. Maybe it's good at the beginning to begin to move people off the dime. But after that, they have to really be engaged in what it is that they're learning. And that for us, the power of groups is really critical in helping people and in giving some sort of shared passion and shared goal that puts people on the same path together, the path that they will get better to help others, if not themselves. And so practice makes perfect is kind of a, wow. It's just like what we were saying, you will work, you will perform as you practice. But it doesn't always work that way. These are nice things to say, but it doesn't always work that way.
Yeah, I count it as a net sum game, right? If I have 100 rounds, I take a box of 100 rounds to the range, and I engage in 50 good trigger presses and 50 horrible trigger presses, what's my net gain? Essentially, 0. Because for every good press that I've instilled, I've got a bad trigger press. So I'm practicing, but I'm really not gaining a lot of skill set with it. And that's where I think you're 100% right, Doc. But you've got to be guiding what you're doing. I could get more out of 10 absolutely perfectly felt rounds than I could 100 that are done 50-50.
Michael just commented a neuroscientific theory claiming that an increase in sympathetic efficiency arises from presynaptic.
Synaptic cells, repeated persistent stimulation, postsynaptic cell. Yes, absolutely correct on a Hebbian theory.
Very correct. The short layman's version, if it fires together, it wires together.
Wires together. Weighing in on what just Dr. Lewinski said, and I think this is something, I get it, it's not, we'll call it politically correct, but putting that aside for a minute. At the end of the day, we act based on our values. And a lot of times as instructors, we don't tie our values back to our actions. And the thing is, at the end of the day, we are training on the range, we are training on the mat, we're training in the training center against our values. And the values are what is permissive. There was General Sokolic, who was actually a CAG Delta guy and then ended up running the John F. Kennedy Warfare Center in schools, once commented to all the generals that came in from all the SF groups. He said, I will see each of your guys a minimum of 2 times a year. How many times do you see them? Training, if you take a look at the NCO Creed of the Army, is the continuity of not only competency, but the message of the values of what your organization stands for. So the first thing I would offer, piggybacking on Dr. Lewinski's comments, is at the end of the day, everything we do out there, everything the student do, should get us a step closer or be in alignment with our values. And Adam, to your first question, the one point, being that said, and this is also an earlier point that Tom mentioned, I would argue that it is okay to be subjective. And I don't mean that in gross terms, that it's okay to not have standards. That has nothing to do with it. But what I will sort of premise to the folks or propose to the folks is we a lot of times live in this illusion of objectivity. If you score an 85 compared to scoring an 80, if you do this and that, and we believe that that is more defensible than saying pass, fail, they did learn today or they didn't. I'm going to tell you in reality, and this is from stuff I deal with, Monell claims and everything else, it's okay to say that this person, even though they apparently did the same exact thing, did not learn, whereas this person did, and that you failed this person or you made them remediate because of this. You are an instructor. You can coach your terms and you can define your terms in qualitative methodology as well as quantitative methodology. That doesn't mean that you have free reign. You have to be based in science. And that's where For Science with Dr. Lewinski's work and Lon's work at Vertra and everybody else that was on here do amazing work. And that's why we need to do that. But the point that I would argue to the group is a lot of times we allow numbers to drive our training as convenience. Anybody can say that 6 is bigger than 5, but less than 7. It doesn't mean anything's been accomplished. So I call that the illusion of objectivity. And I think as instructors, we have to become comfortable with standing up and saying, this is the case, and here's my reasoning behind it, regardless of it doesn't meet the exact same criteria of that experiment before it. So my 2 cents to your question.
Going back to an earlier point, it was interesting because, you know, you're talking about a lot of different topics, but the one thing that popped into my mind was slow is smooth, smooth is fast, which comes up a lot. And it's interesting because there's a lot of people that attribute that quote to a lot of different people. And I believe the person that actually coined that was a Japanese jiu-jitsu expert. What the hell's his name? Count Koma, Mitsuyo, oh my God. Mitsuyo Maeda. Now Google that because I may be wrong. Mitsuyo Maeda, slow is smooth, smooth is fast. There's something really interesting about that concept because When I was speaking to some tier 1 guys, one instructor specifically, I'm not going to name names. I was talking to him and I brought up that concept because I said, oh, it's kind of like slow is smooth, smooth is fast. He's like, fuck that, fast is fast. And he said, you have to build the skills to get there. And I was like, it's always stuck with me that he said that, because I can't tell you how many times I've heard that concept, slow is smooth, smooth is fast. And he's like, no, fast is fast. He's like, you have to get there. So I want to throw that out there to you guys. You're on mute. You're on mute.
You're muted, Doc.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I was teaching this last night. I was teaching it to a student in my karate class. And we were working on a basic kata, which is Geki Saiichi. Doesn't matter. It contains this move, a back fist, and then a groin strike. And the student was doing both fast. And what I taught him to do was to blend those two. And so he's doing the back fist, pulling the elbow in, and now doing this. So he moves from two jerky motions into one smooth jerky motion by means of incorporating his elbow into that technique. And now both those techniques are smooth and fast. And when he combines his thighs and his hips with that, so his motion has a great deal of velocity and impetus to it, and so does his point on contact, we now have smooth, fast, and really effective. So at least in complex motor skills, as demonstrated by those motions, not everything, but I contend that drawing a gun from a holster is a complex psychomotor skill, and the better you get it down, the faster it is and the smoother it is. It's not jerky, it's not fragmented, not comprised of a variety of different subcomponents that are fast. The whole action is smooth and fast, and your eye and brain are working together on that. And so I would significantly argue that fast is fast. I think learning how to become fast through becoming smooth and efficient is really critical. But that's just my thinking about it. 50 years in building.
I'm going to follow on with Doc, and because I can now, since there's only 4 of us, I'm going to cut Lon off. Ken Lewis brought up a really good point. One phrase is learning, the other is performing. So the thing about this is, and Lon, giving credit where credit's due to you with type 2 and type 1 thinking, we can use type 2 thinking to create type 1 heuristics. It's okay to have both of them together. They're not exclusive. One creates the other. And so the other thing is, with that piece, back to smooth as fast, is this is sort of an argument from the sculptor. And if you watch the greatest athletes that you recognize, shooters, sprinters, Bolt, Jordan for shooting. If you notice, one of the commonalities of them is there's no wasted effort. They have made the straightest point from A to B, the least amount of energy for the least amount of for the most amount of efficiency. And so the smoothness is in the discovery of the efficiency. Now, once you get that, that smoothness becomes the fastest fast. But without it, you will never achieve the fastest fast. And we did, again, I was in door kicking school for SF and everything else. We did it till our hands bled. But the idea is you learned what was, there's an old saying in Kendo, swing a sword 1,000 times and your 1,001st, you'll begin to understand it, because you have no longer have any muscle. It has to be efficient or you won't be able to cut through your opponent. So I would argue that I think that from a training standpoint, we can use type 2 to create type 1. I think discovery in finding the flaws or the inefficiencies, sort of like remove all the marble that you don't need and you get the sculpture type of metaphor. And then what we can do at the end of that is that becomes that which we train as our heuristic.
Luann has a comment here and a question for everybody on the panel. Okay, Lon, go ahead.
Sorry, man. I'm going to take it just, my dog had to at some point, right? He knows when it's my time to speak, and he decides that it's his turn. So from my perspective, I wanted to look at, when I look at the aspect of speed, I developed it more as speed comes from an elimination of all chaos. If you can eliminate chaos, then things speed up. And I define chaos as all the stuff that's unnecessary. So system 2 driving system 1, right? System 2 eliminates the unnecessary around system 1. The aspect of the marble sculpture, same thing, right? Eliminate what you don't need. I looked at it from the elimination of all the chaos, all the unnecessary, and it's just another way to get to fast.
So to get to Lance's question, she was asking you guys your opinion when it comes to motor learning, external versus internal focus in relation to what we've already been talking about.
Well, it's interesting. The latest push in motor learning, and I defer to Lon on this as well, because I think it's his area of expertise, and if his dog would only shut up, he'd probably have something really significant. But the latest push in motor learning is an external focus of attention on accomplishing something. And when we look at Gabby Wolf's work, and I like what she's done, and some of the other researchers that have focused on external focus, like people that are pounding a bag and lifting a weight, they have an external focus on accomplishment of a task. And I think that's important at the beginning. It's important at the end. But how do you get the skill and build the fluidity and build all of that stuff together? Part of it has to do with an internal narrow focus. For instance, if you're working that trigger press, that's an internal narrow focus of attention. It is done at the very end of your stroke. And it better be tied in with the rest of that motion, at least I think. But it's built in an internal narrow method of feeling that press and the recoil or the reset. So really, if we want to get really good at this, at certain points in our learning, we have an internal narrow. At other points, we have an external narrow, such as we may be better at putting or even shooting, like our novices are. Our novices pointed the gun, and just pointing the gun and looking at the target and pointing the gun, they did 10% poorer than trained officers coming out of an academy. That's pretty impressive. So an external narrow focus of attention might be a good way to start, but we don't build any skills with that. And so the question becomes, what's the transition in between? And what focus of attention do we need as we're building subsets and beginning to put them together into a process? And most of what we do involves all 4 foci of attention at different points in the learning and performing process.
So I'm going to piggyback on what Doc just said with specifically the external versus the internal, and speaking to Lou's question. We train transition drills between a long gun and a handgun. Why can't we as instructors design transitions drills between internal narrow and external narrow? Because that's what's going to happen in a real gunfight. That's what's going to happen in a real decision-making process. And again, my area is about decision-making. We will focus on that outside of ourselves as a way to accomplish something, what we see as a desired outcome. But then when it isn't going right, what do? We should be able to immediately transition. Am I pulling the trigger right? Am I doing that? Is my stance or anything else? Whatever else it is. So the thing is, we have to be able to almost switch seamlessly between those. And we have what Doc just described with external narrow, but we have also external broad. We teach scanning, what you saw in one of the earlier classes today about that. We teach scanning. Isn't it scanning just external broad? So the thing is, how can we switch between these where the person isn't stuck in them? And what you're doing is we can design courses of fire or even just two-dimensional stuff on a screen that forces a person, a student, to move in and out of their focus the same way our eyes focus on the front sight or the target. The question is, can we take our brain and our attention load, well, cognitive load and our attention focus and do the same thing? But we don't teach that as a skill. And so the short question is, why don't we? Because we know it's needed as instructors and, excuse me, as coaches.
Real quickly, and I don't mean to kind of take this back a step, but there may be new instructors here that don't understand the context between internal narrow and broad versus external narrow and broad. Can somebody please explain that in a more generic term so that if somebody is listening to this, they can catch back up to what we've been talking about?
Yeah, the best person I've ever heard describe this is Lon, so I'll defer to him.
Muted. You're muted. Uh-oh, the dog. Oh, he he just quit. He said
and Elvis left the building.
That's funny. That's funny. The Vaughn said the way of the seal, Mark Devine teaches how to use self-talk to transition from internal to external and back.
So and again, back to your question, and I'm going to agree with Vaughn as well, obviously, is if you think about quadrants and you just were to put, I don't know, internal, external on the x-axis and broad and narrow on the y-axis, you've got a matrix of a 2x2 where you've got internal narrow, external broad, internal broad, which doesn't happen a lot. And the short answer is, are you looking inward, internal, on a very narrow piece of it? Are you looking external, something outside of yourself? So an internal narrow would be my finger feel of the pad of my finger on the trigger. A external narrow would be tunnel vision, so to speak, or what we call tunnel vision, of only focusing on something out there and you're forgetting everything else. An external broad is you're seeing everything else there, you're scanning, but you're not seeing the one thing that you need to focus on. An internal broad would maybe something as, did I leave the gas on, back to Dr. Artwell's stuff about these intrusive thoughts, is that I leave the gas on that, and that's not really helping you in this. So that's sort of a quick synopsis of it.
I want to point out as well that we tend to teach these in discrete quadrants, and very often they'll be together. I'll give you an example. I was on the range, Phoenix PD range with Ron Avery, and he was teaching me a drill in which we were looking at how I grip the gun and the impact that had on my body recoil by means of having me stand on a 2x4 at an angle with balls of my feet. I mean, this is like 20 years ago. And feel the recoil of the weapon based on how I manage that grip. And so I was focused narrowly and internally on the grip. And we weren't worried about external, but the target and the bullet on the target. I was firing at a target, but that external was not important. What was important for that exercise was getting a precise awareness of what I was doing on that grip and how it was working on the gun. And the effect of that, managing that muzzle flip and the energy of that in relation to the movement of my body, which was an internal broad focus. Now, it's hard to do both. We can monitor both, but we can't intensely focus on both. But as John was pointing out, Dr. John, in a dynamic encounter, we will have multiple things going on at the same time, and even sequentially. So you'll have an external narrow focus on your sight, and then the person will fall, and then you'll see an external broad focus of attention, in which you'll see the tree, and then you'll see the forest. You'll see the person falling, and then you'll see the environment. So it could be sequential, it could be simultaneous, but these things often work in harmony for great performance. And one of the interesting things, and Dr. John kept talking about it, is building some automaticity so we can focus on what we need to make really great decisions that are really the end product of our performance. That's what we will be held accountable for. And most officers, by the way, get sued, not because of great shots that they place. It's a decision they made before they made those shots. And that's what they get fired for, charged for. And boy, if we don't spend as much time teaching decision making as we do worried about internal and external focus of attention on the range, I think we're missing our challenge.
And Doc, I couldn't agree more with you. And actually, it's a good segue into Lou's question here. So, and this is just my 2 cents on it. When a complex motor skill, Lou, I would offer to you that the first thing is for them to recognize it is complex and that it's okay. Back to what Doc was pointing out is the very nature of something complex means you will not be able to do everything right within the moment. And I don't mean that as a bad way. I mean that as that should be an impetus, a motivation to back to what Lon talked about earlier, where we want to get certain things out of our active memory into the level of where we don't have to deal with it because we're back into the level of heuristics. That's why we build our subroutines that work 90% of the time. So when you're teaching complex motor skills, we can work in the beginning in a block fashion. Our goal eventually is to bring them into complexity, into multiple stimulus and multiple environments and different balance points. But then I would also agree with what Bill said, what Dr. Lewsinski just said, is every now and then it's really cool for the student to come back after they've gotten to the point of not mastering a complex task, but being proficient at it. They're doing well. They're doing pretty good. And then you bring them back and you teach them to enjoy concentrating on one nuance of it. The balance of the balls of your feet with your grip and how it affects it. And you know what? Remove the target. Just shoot into the freaking berm. And that's okay. Because that's not what you're concentrating on right now. And you show them the complexity and you teach them to enjoy the complexity. And then they crave coming back and working on another dimension of the complexity. It is to, and I know I've joked with Lon most of the evening about the elephant, but the 6 people eating the elephant and every person looking at it with a different perspective. It's a rope, it's a trunk, it's a this, everything else. But what I'm getting at is there's nothing wrong with that. Allow them to play with that and force them to say, okay, you've now experienced the trunk. I want you to go experience the tail. You've now experienced this. I want you to go experience that. And realize, and then bring them back to combining it in the totality and let them, Vaughn mentioned this about the idea of self-talk in his earlier comment. Well, okay, the student comes to you and says, I'm having trouble switching from this to this. Well, let's work on that. What are you having trouble to? Well, once I begin to focus on the target, I don't come back to my balance. Okay, well, let's do a little sort of mantra for you. Okay, you know, we all have front sight trigger pull, front sight smooth or anything else. But maybe with this person, it's knees, hip, drop. In other words, lower your center of gravity. And then what you do as a craftsman, a coach, you tailor. And this is sort of like medicine. And wicked problem theory medicine is commonly cited because we prescribe a treatment. Knowing that we'll never solve the problem, we only manage the problem. You manage a disease, you change its meds over time, and it's a different frame that you look at it. So now we take a look at this person, and due to their flexibility, due to the level of skill, we prescribe a treatment. They come back to the ring 6 months later. They've changed. We prescribe a different treatment. That's the dynamic aspect of dealing with these type of things. So again, thinking about it this way, back to Vaughn's stuff with self-talk, I prescribe a mantra, so to speak, of 3 or 4 things that I can say in the middle of a gunfight that will bring me back to that present that person needs to be brought back. And that's not necessarily the same mantra as a person to the left or right of them. So again, just thoughts.
Sorry, my computer literally died as John swatted that question over to me. So I don't think I could have made the timing any better.
Oh, sure. Our computer died. It's a technology problem. Yeah. Wait a minute. Do you have sunspots where you're at? Is that what it might be?
No. I had to run in the other room and plug it in. And so hence the darkness now.
All right. I want to, you know what? I feel like, I know I do this all the time, but I feel like there's so many people, like there's still 30 people on here. And it's just amazing that we're almost, well, 3.5 hours, just over 3.5 hours into this. Such a long conversation. I want to give away something more significant. So a while ago, some friends sent me some batons. Now the company is called Banawi. They're actually out of Germany, and they make these batons. They're cam-lock batons. They're similar to the ASP, one of the Talons. Much better quality. I think the minimum cost, even for like a 16-inch, is $180. Very, very high end. I have a couple of them, so I'm gonna give one of these away to somebody because I don't need a shit ton of batons. I do nothing with them, and they've been sitting around my house. So let's come up with a question. I'll tell you. I know exactly what the question is going to be. The first person to list the title of both Lon's and Dr. Lewinski's podcast interview with me for the Tactical Breakdown podcast, the first person to put both of those titles in the comments is going to win a baton.
I don't even remember the title of mine.
They're going to have to figure it out. I don't know what to tell you. I just want to give away some stuff, so I might as well make it interesting for me.
Okay.
When we talk about the different types of learning methodologies and the way people learn, how important is it that we start training instructors in how to actually teach other different types of learners, if you understand my question?
Yeah, I think you have to meet your student wherever they're at. I mean, it's kind of a universal. Whether they need more visual aspects, if they need to help you guide their body physically through space, you meet the student where they're at. And one of the things when I did instructor development schools, and I used to fire up a lot of instructors. I said, I'm going to tell you this: if your student's failing, it's probably your fault. And a lot of instructors don't want to hear that. But I truly do, I do believe that if you have a student that's not successful, they're highly probable it's your fault. And if you don't take that level of ownership and accountability, you're never really going to get them where they need to be. I worked with students that agencies were about ready to wash out for one reason or another, or I had individuals that had neurological disorders, and they had really bad tremors, but we were able to make it through. You just have to, you have to be able to be creative and understand what they need and sometimes figure those needs out, and then deliver basically your promise to them as a student. Give them your best.
Yeah, one of the things that was said earlier, which I really like, was the language, and it's using the appropriate analogies as to where the student is at and what works for them. So, yeah, it's not just learning styles, but it's language issues, it's concept issues. There's a variety of different things, and knowing what interests the student and what their experience is really very helpful. So I think that's kind of a critical component, as Lon says, meeting the student where they're at is really kind of an important issue. And the ironic thing is that the older we get, the more we learn about teaching. And I wish I could go back and teach some of my classes again at the university, because I sure would do it differently. Because we start where we are and we move forward from that point, just like our students do. And so the question becomes, how do we learn? And what do we need to think about and structure? Because the very same thing deals with us. And so I think that's important. I'm going to have to go pretty soon, but before I do, one of the bugbears I have with training, and particularly with firearms instruction, and this has nothing to do with trainers who are really committed and trying to work hard at it. It's a confusion in the management that qualification equals in-service training. And about a decade ago, I was speaking with New York City and their deputy commissioner in charge of training. And he told me that they spend, at that point, $2.3 million qualifying their officers twice a year. And that includes maintaining the range and travel and paying for people when they're in training, transportation, all the rest of it. $2.3 million in qualifying their officers twice a year, and they don't know what they get for it. And that's really sad. It's a sad statement about police administration and their view on what training is. Because if training is only inoculating yourself against a civil suit or providing your officers with enough basic instruction that they leave with an overload of confidence and an underload of competence, we have a serious problem, and it has nothing to do with the people that are on this podcast. It has to do with the organization that employs them, that really doesn't understand what training is. And we would get so much more out of our training if people really understood it. And maybe we take some minimal course that is our qualification course that we cover at least once a year, just to prove that our students can take a tool and use it in a minimal standard. And the rest of the time we use for short bursts of training. I don't know, it's something that really, really bothers me. I know the people I'm on here with really have committed to that and understand the fallacy of the thinking that goes on with that. But that's the elephant we face as we're trying to get more money, get more time. It's a concept that administrators have about what is necessary to build the skills in this profession.
So go ahead, Sean. I'll let you jump on, and then once you're done, I think we're almost at 4 hours. I think we're gonna shut this thing down. I'm gonna let everybody say their last piece. I do want to point out. So Daniel, first one, Force Science: Unlocking Potential in Law Enforcement with Dr. Bill Lewinski, and Critical Incident Response Team with Lon Bartel. So Daniel, shoot me a quick email, adam@islet.network. And send me all of your address and contact information, and I'll get that sent off to you, brother. Thank you so much, and thank you everybody for being a part of this. So, John, I'll let you finish off on your thought there, and then we'll go through this.
I want to thank everybody that's still on here. It's just been a great experience. But to everybody out here, and this is not blowing smoke up your ass or anything else, you aren't the problem. You are that is striving. You're the 300, so to speak. You're the ones that are standing out there trying to do the right thing. And you're not trying to do the right thing. You are doing the right thing. If you're on this roundtable, you are seeking knowledge and doing the right thing. So there's a saying in meditation in Sezat. Once you sit, you've accomplished all that you're supposed to accomplish in Sezat. Everything after that is just extra. You're here. You've accomplished what you've needed to do. So first of all, take that away. I get it. It's tough. It sucks sometimes. And you're going to go back tomorrow and do it again. And you have our ultimate gratitude. Bill, Adam, Lon have all talked about, and you guys have talked about this idea of meeting the student. So I'm going to offer you one thing about that. If you want to meet the student, talk to him. Oh, he's a tactile learner. He's a visual. No, just talk to the student. Ask them point blank, how do you learn? And if they say, I've never thought about that, then let's have that conversation first. The student is part of the equation. In Kyoto, the Japanese art of the bow, the archer, the arrow, and the target are all the same thing. You can't separate them. In Aikido, it's nage and ukemi. The fact is the thrower and the throwee are part of the same system. You as a coach do not exist without the student. They are part of their determination. So again, all I would offer to all you guys out there is keep them, the student, part of your equation. My 2 cents, and you have my ultimate thanks, and I'm open to you 24/7.
Ditto,
Well,
John.
go ahead.
Just ditto. I concur. Really appreciate John's history with martial arts. I spent 50 years in traditional Japanese martial arts, and I've learned so much in that. And sharing it with John is just amazing, but also sharing it with everybody here. It's just a pleasure to share with you guys your passion. And it's my passion too. We're saving lives. It's an important thing we all do. Adam, thank you for the invite. Lon, great pleasure working with you again. And I look forward to many more continued years of working together.
Absolutely. You know what? And Adam, thank you much. I get honored by going on here, and I said it earlier, standing on the shoulder of giants, and between John and Bill. I really truly that's what I get to do, and being able to listen and just take in that knowledge and that perspective, banter around some ideas. I get blessed with that opportunity, and then I think that responsibility is to turn around and send it out to help anybody else. So Adam, thank you, and gentlemen, thank you. I really truly appreciate it.
Absolutely. One of the things that I do want to point out real quickly, for everybody watching this, yes, Lon was on the critical incident response team's roundtable, but he had an independent an interview with me for the Tactical Breakdown podcast titled Simulated Event Training. So you should definitely check that out on the Tactical Breakdown podcast. I'm just going to ask the instructors real quickly for 2 seconds to hang out for a quick AAR after this event. Thank you to everybody for taking the time and joining us here on this Instructors Roundtable. It is truly an honor to be able to put this on for you guys. And I hope you can join us for all the events tomorrow. Make sure to check out the live final or closing ceremonies at 1 p.m. Eastern tomorrow time for the IALEFI Online conference. And of course, there will be a lot more information coming out then, and we're going to be doing all the live draws for all the giveaways. So make sure to join us for that. Thank you so much for joining us on the Instructors Roundtable for the IALEFI Online conference, and we'll talk to you soon. Stay safe.